The Monsters That Made Us is brought to you by the Cage Club Podcast Network. For all things movies, music, media, monsters, and more, head on over to cageclub.me. That's cageclub.me. Today we're heading to Blackmore, a village in rural England where tragedy has once again struck the cursed Talbot family. After a handful of grisly deaths, including that of his brother Ben, acclaimed actor Lawrence Talbot has returned to his ancestral home to reunite with his estranged father and track down his brother's killer. After a savage encounter with a wolf, the body count begins to rise, and it's not long before Lawrence's history of mental illness begins to draw the suspicion of Inspector Francis Aberline. Now, Lawrence will have to dive deep into his family history and face his own demons in order to put an end to the bloodshed. Stick to the road and keep clear of the moors as we discuss the Wolfman.
To a new world of gods and monsters.
Listen to them. Children of the night.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? I'll show you who I am and what I am.
You're insane. I tell you, I killed a wolf, a plain, ordinary wolf.
By studying these and other species, we add to our knowledge of how life evolved, how it adapted itself to this world.
He went for a little walk. He should have seen his face.
Welcome to the return of The Monsters That Made Us, the podcast where we celebrate the spooktacular characters and films in the Universal Studios Classic Monsters series. Today we'll be discussing the 2010 remake, The Wolfman. I'm the Invisible Dan Colon, and joining me as always is my co-host and our resident wolf dad, Monster Mike Manzi. How are you, Mike?
I'm okay. I want to thank you for binding me to a chair for the last 25 years so I didn't turn into the Wolfman. So that's what friends are for.
Yeah, I say wolf dad only really because you are older than I am. And so you are my senior.
Let the beast out. Let it out.
So with Stephen Sommers' Mummy trilogy in our rear view and his effort to create a shared monster universe in the proverbial trash heap, it seems, at least to me, that Universal wanted to shift gears a bit to keep the monsters alive with a more straightforward back-to-basics approach. Does that sound familiar? I'm not sure why they chose to remake The Wolfman specifically, though it might have had something to do with the fact that the star and producer Benicio del Toro is a massive fan of the original 1941 film, having grown up with the poster of Lon Chaney Jr. on his bedroom wall and amassed an impressive collection of Wolfman memorabilia throughout his life. But whatever the case may be, in 2010, the accursed Lawrence Talbot came roaring back to the big screen, along with a star-studded cast, incredible Academy Award-winning makeup effects, and a classic Gothic setting, just like the old films from the 30s and 40s. Now, Mike, I know the Wolfman has kind of shot up to the top of your list of your favorite of the monsters, especially since we started this show, and I know you've seen this one before, but how did you feel about it this time around, and have your thoughts evolved since you first saw it?
Yeah, actually, it's been a while since I'd last seen it, and I, cat out of the bag, love this movie. So many things are just racing through my mind while I was watching it. I was just having such a great time. The callbacks, the style of this movie, I mean, it almost feels like it's in line with the Dracula 79 series.
Sure.
Right? Like they went back to that. I love that Hopkins is here and in Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's like,
yes,
can he play Frankenstein? Can he just keep doing this and be in all the movies? I love the actors in this movie. I love the acting, its style in this movie. I think when I first saw this, I mean, obviously I knew Hugo Weaving from The Matrix and things like that, but when I saw him in this, I was like fan for life. I was like, I think this is like my favorite Hugo Weaving for some reason.
That's interesting.
Maybe it's the character more than I really enjoy the spin on the inspector this time. We'll get there when we talk about the movie. I think I only seen the director's cut, to be honest. I think when I very first saw this, it was a home viewing and it was director's cut. I watched the entirety of the director's cut for tonight and I started rewatching it in the theatrical cut, and quite a different picture. I wasn't able to conclude that screening, but it's very interesting. I'm going to go back and watch how that turned out. But I love the director's cut. I love the pace of it. I love I just like so much of the gore. I was surprised how gory it was. I
Yeah.
love the beast. The beast looks awesome. You know, we'll get to so much more as we go on, but overall, like, I was still impressed.
So I saw this one in the theater in 2010. It's funny to think about now, but my grandmother and I, we would often go to the movies, and this was her pick. She asked me if I wanted to go see The Wolfman. I was kind of surprised that she would want to go see it. And she's like, well, I grew up going to see The Wolfman at the movies. And I was like, oh, right, of course. So we went. I don't remember if she liked it or not. I'm sure she probably did. But yeah, I've always had a soft spot for this movie, especially now that we've been like watching all these movies for this show. I'm watching it through a new filter, I guess. I'm watching a lot of these movies again, just with a different eye. And, I still like this one, although I think now I am a little more critical of it than I ever have been, because now's the time, right? If we're going to talk about this movie, let's scrutinize it a little bit. I remember looking at my Letterboxd a couple years ago. I had watched it. I read that I had been a little bit frustrated with how long it takes for Lawrence Talbot to become the Wolfman. The whole movie, I'm like, I'm just waiting for him to become the werewolf. It struggles a little bit there with pacing at times, but then again, the acting in this is really good. So, a lot of times I'm just I'm enjoying watching Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins, share scenes together. That's always fun. But I do think that the pacing is a little bit off. The whole werewolf dad twist is telegraphed way too early in the movie. Anthony Hopkins kind of plays the villain from the very first frame when he shows up. It's not really a secret. I was watching this with my girlfriend the other night, and like halfway through the movie, she's like, so wait, is Anthony Hopkins a werewolf too? I'm like, oh yeah, see, so she's never seen it, and she knows right away that Anthony Hopkins also is a werewolf.
It doesn't help that he's wearing like animal skins and tiger robes and, telegraphing it and being very suspicious all the time. I hear you.
All those issues aside, I do love the setting. Like you said, the acting is great. The special effects are awesome. I think going with an R rating was absolutely the right decision, because now the Wolfman can really tear people up. When we look back at Lon Chaney Jr., all he could really do was thrash people around a little bit.
The throttling, yeah.
We get to actually see a Wolfman rip arms off.
Yo, yeah. I did not remember that so much as how intense it got and how gory it got and how he was ripping people limb from limb. He did all but like rip an arm off and hit somebody with it, which, would have been in style with the way some of this was going. But yeah, and the effects work too. Like, I remember the public and myself being a little dubious of how CGI was being used in the transformation. But I got to say, like, it was really well done. Like, I think it was very respectful. Like, it was more so about the shot than how they did the shot. And I that like a lot throughout the movie.
I found the CGI to be a little bit dated, but that's to be expected. This movie is like 14 years old now.
Yeah, there's still two guys at the end of this tussling in suits.
That's the thing, is that the CGI is really just used for the transformation. Everything else, and we're going to talk about it, everything else is done with practical effects. So I can't really be too upset about it. And they do cut away from the transformation a lot. So it kind of keeps that CGI to a minimum, which I really respect. I think that they really wanted to embrace the old practical effects the way the old movies used to do.
It feels more like a necessity at times.
My complaints are at a minimum, but it is definitely a little messy, and it did do pretty horribly at the box office in its initial theatrical run. And I do know quite a few people who don't look upon this one too favorably.
Maybe I have a part of a theory about that, is how it's such a drastic tonal shift from the Mummy stuff, especially from where the Mummy stuff ended and where we're still knee deep in, Dan, you and I, with the Scorpion King stuff. The parents were probably like, hey, it's going to be like that, right? Let's take the family. And they get there, and the opening scene, like, a guy is slashed to death. It's like, whoa, even in the theatrical cut, that opening sequence is still pretty brutal. And there's like decapitations and crazy wild stuff. The only thing I was surprised they pulled back on was the sex. Like, there is no sex. This is a very sexless film, which I wonder if that also has to do with some themes of father and son. And he was coveting one of his son's girlfriend. I mean, there's some deep rooted like psychological stuff they didn't really have time to get into, I feel, but they tried, but mostly trying to just focus on Lawrence. I just felt like that was probably unexpected for them to go so hard with the Wolfman, to be like, we're taking it, it's going to be an R-rated, wild sort of period drama, like Pride, Prejudice, and Werewolves.
Yeah, I don't have any hard information to back this claim up, but I do feel like maybe the lack of sex in this movie could be due to the fact that, I mean, they really made Lawrence a very different character. Remember, we talk about how Lon Chaney played him in the original movie, you know, how creepy it was spying on this woman through a telescope. He had this like boyish quality, a sort of innocence, whereas this Lawrence Talbot is the opposite, right? He's kind of a tortured guy from the start. He's dealing with a lot of deep-seated family issues. Sex is kind of the last thing on his mind. At the same time, he's not like a sad boy about it either.
Right. No, he's a brute. You know, like even when before he becomes Wolfman, like you get a couple of drinks in him and, you know, talk about his mom and you know, like he's still going to get you. But no, that's an interesting point you make about how like he is already exhibiting Wolfman features mentally and like all that before becoming Wolfman, as far as like Lon Chaney was a totally like happy-go-lucky dude looking to score, and then he gets bit and now he's like, oh my goodness, like I'm having a crisis. It kind of speeds things up a little bit and it lets them focus on other stuff in this movie that we can talk about.
And I kind of like how it makes the love story that there is in this movie mean more, right? I feel like if there was more sex stuff in this movie, then it might feel a little cheap. But I think because it's so restrained and they really allow the characters of Lawrence and Gwen to breathe and develop as acquaintances, and then, you know, they start to fall in love with each other, I buy it so much more than if they were to take the more direct route to that. And by the end, they earn that ending. I really love how the movie resolves.
And in that case, like I enjoy the pace of it for those reasons, you know, like I do feel like, you know, some sequences might go on a little lengthy, but I appreciated the time they took to develop the characters in the director's cut. Like there's so much more Lawrence before he gets to Blackmore. You know, he meets Max von Sydow for crying out loud. Like he gets cut out of the whole film. I enjoyed the breadth of it and the time it took. And it's also just felt more in the zone, like period appropriate, like almost like we were watching a play. You know, that's why I enjoyed seeing the Lawrence stuff performing, because it like put me in that mindset. It's like, oh, all right.
I agree. Some of my frustration with the pacing might be due to the fact that I've watched this one a couple times in the past week, you know, so I've been watching it a lot. And so everything just sort of feels a little bit longer. But I want to say now, because we've mentioned it a couple times, we're talking about the director's cut. I watched both in preparation for this. I don't plan on making any distinction between one or the other for the listeners, you know, so if you haven't seen the unrated version, by all means, check it out. But I don't think there's really anything in there that is super integral to the plot. So if you haven't seen it, shouldn't really be an issue. It's about 17 minutes of extra footage. And I think a lot of it is extensions to sequences that already exist in the theatrical cut.
They truncate a lot of stuff and montage things a bit more in the front. And there were definitely a couple of reshoots because he had to meet Gwen differently. Things like that, which won't impede on like the actual storytelling to that much of a degree. But I'll have to be referring to the director's version.
Yeah. I guess with that, let's get into the production of The Wolfman. And I want to say also, as sort of another disclaimer, that there are a lot of really well-known people involved with this one. You know, as we get closer to the present day, we're going to be coming across more recognizable names. And so I don't have a ton of production notes. I do have some, but a lot of these people that we're going to be talking about are like pretty well-known now. So in an effort to not go on for a really long time, I tried to condense everything wherever I could. We'll address these names as we get to them. You know, by all means, check out their filmographies if you don't know who they are. I'm just going to kind of do like a quick sum up of their careers. So Universal announced the remake of The Wolfman in 2006, and at the time, Benicio del Toro was attached as the star. As soon as they announced they were going to be making this movie, he was the guy they had in mind to star, and it's probably also because he's a producer on the film as well, so they didn't have to go hunting for their Wolfman. So del Toro produced this alongside Scott Stuber and Sean Daniel, who also was involved with The Mummy, as we know. Scott Stuber's name, I didn't know who he was. He began as a publicity assistant to Lew Wasserman. He was the head of MCA when they bought Universal and Decca Records in 1962. And then Stuber later became co-president of production with Mary Parent, and in 2004, they were both named vice chairman of worldwide production. In 2008, Stuber signed a 5-year contract with Universal under his vanity card Stuber Pictures, during which time he produced Role Models, The Kingdom, You, Me, and Dupree, The Breakup, Ted, and of course, The Wolfman.
Whoa, that one kind of sticks out. The Wolfman.
Yeah, which one of these things is not like the other? So, like, yeah, the Wolfman definitely sticks out among at least that sample. It seems to me that he did a lot of comedies and lighter stuff, a little action here and there. Yeah, he is currently the chairman of Netflix Films. However, just this year, he announced that he is leaving to start a new company. Screenwriter Andrew Kevin Walker was attached to write the film originally, and he took a lot of guidance from Benicio del Toro, who specifically wanted to draw elements from Werewolf of London and the Hammer film, The Curse of the Werewolf. We haven't covered The Curse of the Werewolf yet. That's definitely something we want to do, but I definitely see Werewolf of London influence in this.
Absolutely. What was my number one gripe about that? We didn't see both werewolves. And in this, we get the two wolves. We get that crazy story about climbing a mountain and going to a cave and getting that whole thing. Yeah, I was definitely vibing on that. We also get a werewolf in London.
Right. Walker's career really took off in the early 90s. He had spent the late 80s as a post-grad working for Tower Records, working on several projects. And then in 91, he finished his script for Seven, which was bought by New Line Cinema, thanks to fellow screenwriter David Koepp. And over the course of his career, he also wrote 8mm, Sleepy Hollow for Tim Burton, Wong Kar-wai's The Follow, and most recently, he wrote David Fincher's The Killer. He's also been something of a script doctor over the course of his career, having done some uncredited rewrites for films such as Event Horizon, The Game, Fight Club, and Stir of Echoes. In February 2007, prolific music video director Mark Romanek was announced as the film's director. However, by January 2008, he left the project due to creative differences.
Okay, that's when I first heard about the project, because for some reason I was following Mark Romanek, maybe because of the music video stuff. That was just a very interesting choice, you know?
Yes.
So I was like, then this movie became on my radar.
Yeah, he's done a shit ton of music videos. If you just YouTube his name, you're going to see a lot of iconic music videos.
It might have been when we were in school, right? Because we were working on short stuff a lot.
Yeah. His original vision was to, quote, infuse a balance of cinema in a popcorn movie scenario, end quote. And he later said, quote, when there's a certain amount of money involved, these things make studios and producers a little nervous. They don't necessarily understand it, or they feel that the balance will swing too far to something esoteric, and we could never come to an agreement on the right balance for that type of thing. Ultimately, it made more sense for them to find a director that was going to fulfill their idea of the film that they wanted, and we just sort of parted ways, end quote.
This feels like Joe Johnston style to me, you know,
Yeah.
like it feels like they let him do what he wants and get away with a lot more. Like I was like, what more did Mark Romanek want to do with this? It's like, it's a serious, heavy period piece. And then it's like a crazy horror slasher.
Well, I can understand why the studio would be nervous about letting somebody direct this movie with what they perceive to be kind of a wild, unorthodox vision, especially after what happened with Van Helsing, and they sort of flopped with The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, right? So, like, I think they were trying to preserve the integrity of their monsters. The idea of a more straightforward period remake of The Wolfman that kind of just goes straight horror and doesn't venture too far outside of the original framework was a safer choice for them. Now, I'm not going to say that worked against this movie because we talked about how much we really liked the finished product, but it sounds to me like Mark Romanek, if he wanted to go into a kind of a weird sort of left field direction with it, they would be uncertain or unsure of that.
But this does do that. Like it goes into a very weird zone. Like there's dreams that are like crazy, misremembered memories that are warped and like time shifts and wild crazy. There's the mutant wolf boy thing. You're telling me the studio was like trying to get that into the movie and Mark Romanek was like, less mutant wolf boy?
It really makes me wonder just how wild his Wolfman movie could have been. There's really no information that I could find as far as what he wanted to do with this movie. I don't think it ever really got beyond, the initial conversations. I'm going to keep searching. Even after this episode is released, I'm going to see if I can find some footage of him talking about his concept for the Wolfman. Maybe we can get some more information. But as of this recording, I don't know.
I'll tell you, the only thing I'd have done different is probably turn Emily Blunt into a wolf woman, a she-wolf, like maybe instead of it being the dad, she could be like, your brother wanted to leave and I wanted to stay and all this, so I had to kill him. And like
After Mark Romanek parted ways with Universal, then the hunt was on for a new director. Apparently, Brett Ratner was the front runner.
Oh boy.
But there were other directors who were considered, including Frank Darabont, James Mangold,
Oh.
Bill Condon, and Martin
Oh.
Campbell.
Basically, all of those except for the rat would have been perfectly sufficient.
Absolutely.
I would have loved to see Darabont instead of Mangold. We basically got that with Logan to a degree. I
Kind
feel
of,
like we
yeah.
got a Wolfman movie.
Right. He's like, they didn't give me Wolfman. I'm going to make Logan. Of course, they ultimately settled on Joe Johnston just 1 month before shooting began. So he only had 4 weeks to prepare for this.
I wonder how much was already prepped.
The full script had been written, and he immediately hired a new screenwriter to do like major rewrites of that original script. We'll talk about that in a second. I want to intro Joe Johnston here. He's an Austin native. He's a film director, producer, writer, and a visual effects artist, which I did not know before I started preparing for this show. Now, like, so much makes sense.
His history with ILM and George Lucas and some of the best stunt sequences ever put on film back in Indiana Jones. And yeah, he's a legend.
He started as a concept artist and an effects technician on Star Wars, the original Star Wars, and then his relationship with George Lucas continued when he co-created the look of Boba Fett for The Empire Strikes Back, and he was the art director for one of the effects teams on Return of the Jedi. He was also one of 4 people, as a team of 4, that received an Oscar for Best Visual Effects for Raiders of the Lost Ark. In 1984, he expressed a desire to leave Lucasfilm for a year, but George Lucas had offered him tuition and half salary if he attended USC School of Cinematic Arts instead. So he did that. He spent a year over at USC, and then he was asked not to return because he, quote, broke too many rules, end quote.
George Lucas's protege broke too many rules? You kidding me?
He made his directorial debut in 1989 with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and then followed that up with The Rocketeer, The Page Master, both of which were box office failures, and Jumanji.
3 out of those 4 movies, like, are pretty rocking.
So this is just a personal note. The Rocketeer is the first movie I remember seeing at a movie theater.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that movie's awesome.
I still love it today. He was originally attached to direct Hulk, but then he dropped out to direct October Sky instead. That was Ang Lee's Hulk. Became Ang Lee's Hulk.
Okay.
But he, of course, would get his shot with a superhero movie when he did Captain America: The First Avenger, which perfect choice to direct that. I had no idea that he was this big effects guy, this visual effects dude. So now, looking back at his filmography, I'm like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. This guy knew how to do visual effects. So
yeah. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, like, that was mind-blowing as a youngster. And, like, I mean, I love his movies. I mean, when's he gonna do a Star Wars? You know, it feels like it would come full circle. Like, he should be on that somewhere at some point. But yeah, I mean, I've always enjoyed his stuff. He's a very competent filmmaker. Like, he just knows how to get the right coverage. He knows how to design a sequence. His stuff is super readable or watchable. I don't know. However, like, his sense of space is acute, right? And so, like, you know, you're gonna get something that is going to cut together, is going to look good. It can only be with meddling, I feel, that something would go awry. To me, look at the director's cut. Like, I really like that cut. I don't think it's his fault if there's any issue going on here. I think he did all right.
No, as far as I'm concerned, people look at big action movies and whatnot as like lesser art than, you know, some other movies. But when I look at a Joe Johnston effects heavy action movie versus like some other action movies, it becomes immediately apparent to me that there is a lot of skill involved and he's really good at it, whereas other people aren't. Based on his style and the movies that I've seen, I can always tell it's a Joe Johnston movie. They always rip.
He comes from the school of like, all right, we're going to storyboard this. We're going to practice this. We're going to, you know, like, maybe we'll have some models and things like that. And we're going to know exactly what we're doing. And then we're going to shoot it. It always seems like he gets it, like, in the shot. He gets everything he's going to need. Whatever he told Hopkins in this movie is like, I need to know, because the performance he got out of a lot of these actors, I think, are great too. Got a knack for period between this and some of his other films, The Rocketeer and Captain America. Maybe that's his zone. Is this his only R-rated film by chance? Because, like, he goes harder than usual. And there's some points where it's like, oh, he's indulging because he never really gets to do this kind of stuff.
It did feel a little bit like that, because you're right. I hadn't thought about it. A lot of his early stuff is like for kids. And then he did Jurassic Park 3, which was also PG-13. But then that gets a little bit gnarly. Everything looks like it's either PG-13 or PG. I don't see anything else on here that is R-rated. He doesn't have a huge list of films that he's directed. I think he spent a lot of time as a visual effects guy before he really got into the director's chair. Young Indiana Jones.
Just about this movie, I love the jump scares,
Mhm.
from time
Yeah.
to time. I feel like they're gone from cinema, maybe because people were doing them too much, but there's like 4 in here and he gets me every time.
I'm not real big on jump scares personally, but he does them well. Like you, I also enjoy the jump scares here. There's something about his style that it speaks to me.
Part of it is it's concise. Like, I don't know how else to say it either. It's just that maybe he doesn't give you more than you need, but he gives you everything you
Yeah.
need to make
Yeah.
the movie, But I feel like in this, he went the extra distance. I feel like The Rocketeer, people got to rewatch that shit. Like, there's such a beauty in the simplicity of that movie. Just as far as like the location, the characters, like the adventure, it's all so nice and encapsulated within that little bubble. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feel like he's got a real understanding of the material that he chooses.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, he immediately hired another screenwriter, David Self, to do a major rewrite of Andrew Kevin Walker's script. Again, only 4 weeks to redo this whole script. Obviously, he didn't completely rewrite the whole thing, but he added about 17 pages of additional dialogue and action sequences, and he also really beefed up that father-son dynamic. I think that's a major part of his contribution, is just making the father-son thing front and center. David Self, he got his start with an entry-level position at Walt Disney in 94, and he ultimately began developing spec scripts. His first 2 commissioned scripts ended in development hell. They were never produced. However, his third script eventually became the 2000 semi-fictional film 13 Days, based on the Cuban Missile Crisis. If you've never seen that, it's excellent.
Does it have a JFK in it?
It does.
I wonder if his other scripts ended up in those Tales from Development Hell books. Have you ever read any of those? Those are cool.
After finishing the script for 13 Days, Self wrote a remake of the 1963 horror film The Haunting at the behest of Steven Spielberg, and that film, of course, was made and released in 1999. Although screenwriter and novelist Michael Tolkien did substantial rewrites of that script, including a new ending. So even though David Self still received sole credit for the screenplay, a lot of his original script was changed by Michael Tolkien.
Oh, that was directed by Jan de Bont? Really?
Yeah.
Oh, man. It didn't really feel like a Jan de Bont movie. Maybe that almost feels like a visual effects test reel. That
Kinda.
entire film.
Yep. Yep.
It's so bright, too, for a horror movie.
It was successful, and that success led to David Self writing Road to Perdition, and then that led to an uncredited job rewriting The Bourne Identity.
Wow. All right. This kid's got some skills.
Yes, and you're going to like this. He also developed a couple of unproduced scripts based on the superheroes Deathlock, Captain America, and Namor the Submariner.
Interesting that Joe Johnston ended up doing Captain America, but why were they doing Deathlock? Deathlock seems so obscure. And Namor,
Yeah.
he deserved his own movie.
Yes, he did. He was briefly attached to the RoboCop remake before it went into turnaround, and he was subsequently replaced entirely. That remake that did come out, I can't imagine it resembles anything like it did when he was attached. So principal photography began on March 3rd, 2008, and lasted until June 23rd. Shooting took place at Pinewood Studios, of course, as well as the town of Chatsworth in Derbyshire, Dartmoor in Devon, and at Castle Combe and Lecoq in Wiltshire.
Yeah, so that castle exterior stuff and the lock stuff, that's all real? Those are real locales?
That's my understanding, yeah.
That's amazing. That place rules. Like, I wouldn't want to live there because it's too big and like cold and isolated, but awesome set.
The Chatsworth house was used for Talbot Hall, all real towns, real houses and stuff.
That really helps you get into it.
So almost a year later, in May of 2009, the entire cast and crew returned to the Old Royal Naval College and Park in Greenwich for 5 weeks of reshoots in order to change the look of one of the werewolves, which had previously stood on 2 legs, but they decided to change it to all 4s. I do like that this movie kind of has our Wolfmen do both.
Yeah.
They're bipedal when they need to be, and then they can run on all 4s.
I was thinking about that too. I can't remember exactly which episode I threw my arms up in the air and declared like it doesn't matter anymore. Like they're just swapping it anyway. It's either he looks more like a dude, he's a wolfman, or a werewolf. He looks like more of a wolf, he's a werewolf, or a wolfman, I guess, if he came from a man. It could
Sure.
be a woman. But like, I loved how he got down on all fours and started galloping like a maniac.
Uh-huh.
It was so bizarre. It added to sort of the strangeness of it and thus added to the horror of it.
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
you see that coming after you. You're like, it's bad enough when a guy's running after you and you're like, it could still be a guy. Okay. But he gets down on all fours and starts doing that thing. You're like, that's definitely a monster.
Yeah, 100%. During this time, David Self, of course, contributed some more rewrites. Originally, he had scripted a much longer sequence where the Wolfman terrorizes London, as well as a longer climax, but Joe Johnston asked him to cut both down significantly. In 2008, as the film was being edited, they realized that these sequences needed to be retained, so they were added back in during the 2009 reshoots as well. Self's original ending also allowed Lawrence Talbot to survive, but during the reshoots, he wrote a new ending where both Lawrence and John Talbot die, and that is the ending, of course, that ultimately made it into the film. And then if you get a chance on the disc, there are 2 alternate endings. I watched both. So in the first alternate ending, it's all like the final scene, like when Gwen shoots Lawrence, right?
By the creek or by the waterfall.
Yeah, they're both that moment. And in the first version, she hesitates and he like chomps down on her neck, but she manages to get a shot off. So she ultimately does kill Lawrence, but then she does survive the attack. So movie ends, she could be a werewolf.
That, in addition to the inspector getting bitten and
Right.
surviving, you can't
Too
have
many
that.
werewolves.
Too many at the end. Yeah, one or the other there. Yeah.
And then in the second alternate ending, or maybe there were 3. Now I'm misremembering. There was one where Lawrence, she hesitates, he chomps down on her neck, and she dies, and then he survives.
Oh, that's
And it's a much more cynical ending, I think. I like the ending that they went with ultimately.
Yes.
But there were all these different choices that they had, and a lot of this got sorted out in the reshoots.
Part of the thing I like about the conclusion is that for the Talbot story and for her, like that's all tied up in a knot, but the Hugo Weaving is still out there.
Yes.
And just the idea of like this crime fighting Wolfman that like let Jack the Ripper slip through his fingers.
I was going to say, Mike, they made Wolf Cop. Wolfman Francis Aberline goes back to England and continues to hunt Jack the Ripper.
Sniffs him out, if you will.
All right, talking about the actors here, let's get into our main cast. Now, this is a much bigger movie than some of the previous ones. We'll get through just the principal cast here. Benicio del Toro is our Lawrence Talbot and Wolfman. He's an Academy Award-winning actor from Puerto Rico. After the death of his mother, he and his father and brother moved to Central PA. He pursued a business degree at the University of California, San Diego, but he dropped out to study acting after taking an elective drama course there. That's what gets you, man. You take that one elective course and suddenly business ain't for me anymore. Eventually, he studied at the Circle in the Square Theater School in New York City, which I have been to. It's great. He began acting for TV in the late 80s, usually playing criminals and drug dealers on Miami Vice and other shows. His breakout performance was in Bryan Singer's 1995 film, The Usual Suspects, for which he won an Independent Spirit Award.
Mumbles, as I think many referred to him as in The Usual Suspects. Terrific performance. I wondered if he even learned lines for that movie, because he'd just be like, "Baba, baba, wababa."
In 96, he appeared in The Funeral, Basquiat, and The Fan, and then Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas in 98. In 2000, though, he became a proper movie star thanks to his Oscar-winning performance in Steven Soderbergh's Traffic, as well as The Way of the Gun, Snatch, and The Pledge.
I think he is a great, I don't want to say stand-in, right? But like a great guy to do what Lon Chaney's presence brought. Just in general, he seems imposing, but he also seems gentle. He seems like a guy that could maybe flip on you, but also doesn't want to. I got like kind of parallels. It's like, oh, it makes perfect sense to play the Wolfman because I kind of got like a similar vibe.
He's got a screen presence that is intimidating. And then when you watch interviews with him, he seems like such a really sweet soul, you know? So he's definitely got that duality about him to be playing a monster and a sweet man. I definitely agree with that. So Anthony Hopkins is our Sir John Talbot. How do you keep this brief? So he's a 2-time Academy Award-winning Welsh actor, did a lot of acting on the stage as well as the screen. He came from a working class family. Go figure, he was more interested in creating art and music than manual labor. He graduated from the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama in 1957, served in the British Army from 58 to 60, enrolled at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and made his professional stage appearance appearance in 1960 at the Palace Theatre. He made his TV debut in a 1967 BBC broadcast of the play A Flea in Her Ear, and the next year he got his big break playing Richard the Lionheart in Lion in Winter, which earned him a BAFTA nomination. That movie I watch about every Christmas. The Lion in Winter is fantastic. It's him with like Peter O'Toole, young Timothy Dalton's in that, Katharine Hepburn as well. Like he's in there with some heavy hitters, and he's got to play one of those sons. He does a great job.
I, of course, knew him growing up as Hannibal Lecter, like talk about horror and monsters. Like he was the human monster everybody talked about back in the 90s or so. But one movie I have to shout out to his because he's got such a long list of films here. But have you seen Magic? By any chance? I watched it last October for Hooptober, and he plays a ventriloquist, and let's just say the dummy takes over. It goes in some odd, strange places as you would expect, and some you might not. But he is incredible in that movie.
I love his casting here. Before we were recording, I had mentioned, to my girlfriend that I love how comfortable he is in front of the camera. I mean, at this age, he's been acting on stage and in front of a camera forever, for like most of his life. Roll that camera, he's going to deliver magic all the time. And what's interesting to me is that now we have two John Talbots played by two incredibly charismatic, iconic actors. We had Claude Rains in the original Wolfman. Now we've got Anthony Hopkins. I didn't think of John Talbot as having to be this important role until I was like, no, he's great in that first movie. He's great here. He's much more integral to the plot than I really gave it credit for.
Yeah, I was getting the same sort of in that I felt Del Toro was kind of like Chaney Jr. Like Anthony Hopkins feels like the dark Claude Rains. It's just like the evil version of the dad. Maybe it's the way their height in proportion to the other actors or whatever, it gives them some type of importance complex or something. But like, no, I definitely was vibing. I was like, this is the best guy to like do like the parallel to Claude Rains. Like it's working so well. And Anthony Hopkins gives so many just unhinged line readings, and you could tell he wants to be in this movie for sure.
You're going to enjoy this. So the scene when he leaves the asylum after visiting Larry, he's playing a harmonica as he walks down the hallway. That was entirely his idea.
All right.
He just was like, this feels right. And Joe Johnston was like, go for it. His justification was that like in that moment, John is sort of using the harmonica to shield himself from the crazy that he is surrounded by.
Oh, that's interesting. Some would say that they shouldn't let John out of that place. Reserve a room for him.
We got Emily Blunt in the role that was originated by Evelyn Ankers as Gwen Conliffe. Blunt is an Academy Award nominated actor from London, England. She described herself as a shy and awkward child. She grew up with a stutter that was at its worst between the ages of 7 and 14. So rather than speak, she spent a lot of time studying the behaviors of others and was eventually encouraged to perform in class using different voices, which helped curb her stutter as well as give her a newfound love for acting.
Nice. I know there's like Devil Wears Prada and all that, and people knew her, but like I definitely came to be in awe of her when she was the Full Metal Bitch in Edge of Tomorrow. Just like a shocking performance in that movie of strength and shit. And I was just like, I need to like just follow her from now on and stuff. So I've even seen Gulliver's Travels.
Yeah, she's great. She's got a really strong presence on screen. Obviously we would love to see more roles written for women, like more powerful roles, more powerful, strong characters. Whatever role you give Emily Blunt, she is going to turn it into that. She has this gravitas that you don't normally see. I'm a little bit afraid of her in every role she's got. And yeah, she's so terrific in just commanding the room whenever she's on screen.
Shout out to her husband Krasinski for doing those Quiet Place movies for her, and she was a great Mary Poppins. A movie I think about a sequence of almost at least once a month, but it used to be once a week, is the border crossing in Sicario.
Oh, I haven't seen Sicario.
Oh, okay, and the end of that movie is very chilling as well. Benicio del Toro's in that too, so I wonder, that was 5 years later, I wonder if they're like, hey, we're back together, except now we're hunting drug lords in Mexico. So I don't know.
Okay, so we've got Hugo Weaving as Inspector Francis Aberline. We've already sort of mentioned that he's in the Matrix. I did some research into like his background. Apparently he's been living in Australia for like most of his life, but he was born in British Nigeria. He's considered a British actor, but he moved around a lot as a child. So he was born in British Nigeria, moved to the UK, lived in Johannesburg, South Africa. Eventually he settled in Australia. He graduated from Sydney's National Institute of Dramatic Art in 1981, made his way onto Australian television and eventually Australian films in the 90s, including, I'm going to consider this an Australian film. You'll understand why. He was the voice of Rex, the sheepdog, in Babe and Babe Pig in the City.
Oh, yes. Because of Dr. Miller, of course. Dr. George Miller, producer of the first, director of the second.
So not long after those movies, he became internationally well known for his performance as Agent Smith in The Matrix. But then he's also been embraced by the nerd community because of, you know, his role as Elrond in The Lord of the Rings. He was V in V for Vendetta. And he came back to work with Joe Johnston again as the Red Skull in Captain America, the First Avenger.
That's right. And he's in another one of my favorites, The Cloud Atlas. He's in there, multiple roles. Everyone playing multiple roles in that movie. Yeah, love the guy. As I said, like maybe my one thing is like he should come into this movie a bit sooner. He arrives, it seems, a little late to the party, needing to have seen more of what's going on, I think, because he just kind of comes in with his English ways and thinks he can solve the crimes his way and stuff. And I don't know, it would have been cooler to see him spend a little more time there. But anyway, I love what he's doing in this movie. The only thing he didn't do was say, "What's all this?" in that really thick accent, but I felt like he would have slipped right into those older movies as well. For me, that's the thing. Maybe it's the facial hair, but he felt like the one guy who you could have slipped into like one of the older black and white ones and been like,
yeah,
oh, is that one of his ancestors or something?
I could see that. Yeah, so the facial hair was authentic based on like the images of the real Francis Aberline. Francis, or Frank Aberline, was the actual lead investigator in the Jack the Ripper murders. The only other Francis, or like I said, Frank Aberline that I know is Johnny Depp in the movie adaptation of From Hell.
Yes, From Hell.
And they made zero attempt to make Johnny Depp look like the real Francis Aberline, because he's Johnny Depp. Why would you want to put that ridiculous facial hair on him? But maybe my favorite Francis Aberline. I only have two to choose from, but I really like Hugo Weaving here, just as you do.
Really smart work in that character into this situation, into this movie, taking something and like sort of grounding it in a reality like that. That's a clever move.
I knew that he was a real character or a real person in history, but I feel like most people probably don't. For those of us who are paying attention or who know this information, it's a really cool little like Easter egg in there. Geraldine Chaplin plays Maliva, the Maria Ouspenskaya role. I didn't know who Geraldine Chaplin was initially, but she is the fourth child of Charlie Chaplin, and she is the first of the 8 children he had with his fourth wife, Una O'Neill.
Okay.
Chaplin had multiple marriages, and so she was the first of the 8 children he had with Una O'Neill. She is also the mother of Game of Thrones actor Una Chaplin.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. I was about to wonder about that.
Yeah, so Robb Stark's wife, played by Una Chaplin, this is her mom. In her late teens, she was an accomplished ballet dancer, having studied and performed at the Royal Ballet School in the early 60s. She then found work as a fashion model in Paris, where she was discovered by filmmaker David Lean. She came to prominence as an actor in his 1965 film, Dr. Zhivago.
Crazy. She's in a lot of stuff I've seen.
I'm not going to bury the lead here. She's 79 years old, still working. Through the 70s, she was in The Three Musketeers and its sequel, The Four Musketeers. She worked with Robert Altman a few times. She was in Nashville.
Yeah, she's in Nashville. Well, like, that movie's enormous. I wonder who isn't in Nashville.
Through the 80s, she mostly did some French language films. She played her own grandmother, Hannah Chaplin, in the 1992 film Chaplin.
Awesome. Very weird, but cool.
Outside of the Wolfman, the 2000s were largely defined by her work in Spanish language films. And like I said, she's still working today. She's got a couple films in development.
Did more horror. She's in The Orphanage. That movie's creepy. Somewhere she's in Fallen Kingdom, Jurassic World.
Art Malik as Singh, our last of like what I'll consider the principal characters here. So Art Malik is a British Pakistani actor who moved to London at the age of 3. He was another business school dropout. He received a scholarship to attend the Guildhall School of Music and Drama and began performing with the Old Vic and Royal Shakespeare companies. His first big project was the 1982 British television serial The Jewel in the Crown. In 1987, he played the Afghan Mujahideen leader who teamed teams up with James Bond in the raid against Soviets in The Living Daylights.
It's true, folks. It's true. And it's not only James Bond, but Rambo did it as well in Rambo 3. So Rambo and James Bond plus the Mujahideen.
In addition to The Living Daylights, he got his first big screen villain role in 1994's True Lies, where he faced off against Arnold Schwarzenegger. These days, he's more active on British television, although he did appear in Disney's live-action Little Mermaid last year.
Great movies. He's in a bunch of fun stuff.
So those are our principal actors. There are a couple smaller roles, but like people I definitely recognize and appreciate. I just want to give a quick mention to David Schofield plays Constable Nye. If you want to talk about your What's All This character, I think this is the guy. So David Schofield is an English character actor who has appeared all over the place. He was in The Last of the Mohicans, Gladiator, From Hell, speaking of that, and 2 of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. But he is also in An American Werewolf in London as the man playing darts in the tavern, the Slaughtered Lamb.
Oh, perfect.
He's like, you made me miss. He's that guy.
I hope canonically, like in his head, that he's playing like his great grandfather in this movie. It's like the whole family knows about werewolves, we do.
Yeah, so I loved seeing that guy show up. Clive Russell plays the character McQueen. He's in the tavern scene where all the guys are talking about Lawrence's mother, not realizing he's sitting there. McQueen is the guy who like tells like the old story.
Yeah, 25 years ago, we was spread out on the moors. From here to there.
That was Clive Russell, who we know as Brynden Tully, the Blackfish from Game of Thrones.
Cool. Okay.
Asa Butterfield is young Ben Talbot in the flashbacks.
Wouldn't have recognized him, but that's cool.
I knew it was him, and I'm trying to see the adult him in the child version of him, and it's difficult. So if you don't know that's him, you probably would never guess. But cool to see him show up here. And then, as you mentioned near the top of the show, Max von Sydow is passenger on train, who is completely cut out of the theatrical version of the movie.
So unfortunate because such a pivotal sequence sets a certain tone. He gets the silver cane with the wolf thing with the sword, so that's set up. Like he has an interesting monologue that's very foreboding, as if maybe he's a Wolfman or some shit. Like you just don't know what's up with this weird guy on the. You meet weird people on the trains in movies all the time. He fit the bill. Such a great scene. Just looking at the list here, some actors that we can't quite say were definitely in the movie, but are listed here. I couldn't find him. Richard Jenkins, who terrific. I mean, America's character actor, right? Like he's amazing these days. He's in everything. Also, Gene Simmons is in here somewhere, apparently. Was he the stand-in for the Wolfman?
I read something about the werewolf howl.
Oh, don't tell me it's Gene Simmons.
It is not only Gene Simmons.
Did they re-record something or did they like sample him?
The Wolfman's howl, according to Wikipedia, incorporated elements from rock singers Gene Simmons and David Lee Roth, as well as opera singers and animal impersonators.
You know something? It's weird they picked those two, but that makes like a lot of kind of cool sense. Like, let's get some guy who could really just like belt it out on stage. Like, I think that's conceptually like very fun because you hear about stuff like, oh, the truck and duel like had when it went over the cliff, like they mixed in a lion roaring to death or something to give it more like an animal vibe, or like this was a beast. So that's very cool. Just like human stuff integrated into the howl, not just animal stuff.
That's the Gene Simmons credit. We would be remiss if we did not talk about the creature design and makeup effects here. In the past, we've gushed about how much we love Jack Pierce's iconic work, and now we've got another equally legendary makeup artist, Rick Baker, who also has a cameo in the movie. I don't know did you catch his cameo?
No, I missed that too.
In this sequence when Lawrence goes to the gypsy encampment and then that mob shows up for the bear, there's that first guy. You see the close-up of his face as he's holding the lantern, and then he gets immediately ambushed across the screen. That's Rick Baker.
Okay. I love that part of the story where they think like it's the show bear.
Yes.
The gypsy bear that's small. And they're like, that bear's like 100 years old. He's not going to hurt. And they show the bear and the bear's like, me? You think I did it?
For the few of you listening who don't know who Rick Baker is, he is an 11-time Academy Award nominated makeup artist and actor, having won 7 of those Oscars for An American Werewolf of London, Harry and the Hendersons, Ed Wood, The Nutty Professor, Men in Black, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and The Wolfman, which was The Wolfman's only Oscar. But really, his list of credits is a mile long. He has been working on so many different projects. I'm one of the few people in my social circles that can name makeup artists, right? Like Jack Pierce and Tom Savini. I just love makeup.
V. Neal, was that one? She did like Beetlejuice.
Rick Baker's interest in makeup began in childhood when he would create artificial body parts in his kitchen as a teenager, like you do.
Yeah.
His first professional gig was as an assistant to prosthetic makeup effects artist Dick Smith on The Exorcist, during which time he was hired to design and create the mutant infant in Larry Cohen's 1974 film It's Alive. So he actually won the inaugural Academy Award for Best Makeup for An American Werewolf in London, which I think is pretty awesome. Those werewolf effects and the transformation, still iconic today.
Did he do Thriller too? Because I saw Thriller first as a kid. And to me, I was like, dear Lord, that is incredible. Like, I thought that was real. John Landis tells an interesting story, too, about when he made Schlock in 1973. And he's like, yeah, I met this kid, Rick, and he gives me his card. So I go over to his house and he's working out of his mom's garage. His mom's like, you here to see Rick? He's in the garage. And he goes in and there's like all of his monster makeup effects and stuff and everything. And to my understanding, he partially, I think him and Landis played Schlock the creature, but I think that was one of his first gigs.
American Werewolf in London predates Thriller, but Thriller, that was sort of the reason why he got that job.
Makes
John
sense.
Landis really wanted to hire him to do the effect.
Mm.
According to Rick Baker, he had decided to turn Michael Jackson into a were-cat, quote, because I just didn't want to do another werewolf, end quote.
Oh. I can see that now. At the time, you don't really differentiate, but yeah, thinking about that now,
Way more feline, yeah.
than canine.
On The Wolfman, Rick Baker was obviously very much inspired by the work of Jack Pierce and wanted to remain true to Jack's original designs while still updating them for a more violent contemporary film. It took about 4 hours to transform Benicio del Toro from Lawrence Talbot to the Wolfman, and as with Jack Pierce's designs, the makeup was designed in such a way as to allow the actor's face to show through, to still, kind of show their humanity. That's also why they chose not to give the actors contact lenses.
Oh.
Especially with Anthony Hopkins, you can tell those are his eyes. It's unmistakable.
I was wondering what that was. It was like whatever the reverse of the Uncanny Valley was what was going, where I was like, that is
Right.
That is 100% real right there. I can see the guy.
Yes. They did the same thing in Werewolf of London. That was initially where Jack Pierce got started with that concept, just applying the appliances and the fur, but still allowing the human face to kind of be seen through that and not completely cover it up. I love that choice.
Yeah.
As opposed to An American Werewolf in London, where it's more of a puppet werewolf. I really like this sort of concept.
Yeah, I think for the Wolfman, they really nailed it. It feels like this is what they would have done if they could have done it back then, right? But they just didn't really know quite maybe as much about makeup, first of all, anatomy, how the face forms and how it moves under makeup and all this. Anyway, technology has advanced to the point where now they could get the snout, they can get more detail, and they can get closer to full coverage while still showing emotion and original acting and all that kind of stuff. Everything that they claim that they're doing, the digital makeup for, it's you got it, it's right here. I know I can tell what he's doing. I can see where he's happy or sad under that. They just kind of pushed it a little. He's a little more buff. His form and his figure is just a little more monstrous. I like that about he's broader. He just feels more dangerous too.
Digital effects were employed for the transformation sequences. It's most evident in the brightly lit asylum transformation, which unsurprisingly was the most difficult in the entire film.
That's a very ambitious sequence.
Yes.
And I'm glad it wasn't a oneer, that they didn't try and do it all in one shot, because cutting between the effects helps sell the effects a little better, because you could always throw in, I think they do throw in maybe one or two non-digital shots, I think, during the transformation. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it's a horrifying scene when we get there.
Oh yeah, they did do a little bit of augmentation to the practical effects. Little cases where they might need Larry's mouth to open wider, but everything that we see as far as the Wolfman in here, if you think it's real practical effect, it is.
I love that he's got like the clothes. So great.
There's something classic to me about a Wolfman still wearing clothes. I literally was just talking about this last night. That to me is what keeps this movie feeling like a remake of the 1941 Wolfman as opposed to any other kind of werewolf movie. Most other werewolf movies, they don't have that. But having Lawrence keep his clothes on. And then, I love that when Sir John turns into a wolf, he immediately rips his shirt off. He's not going to be inhibited by these human clothing anymore. He's fully embracing the animal side. I mean, it's a little detail, but to me it sells the idea of like, we're remaking this classic 40s movie.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so finally, our last major credit here, the music. So this was composed by film composer and Oingo Boingo frontman Danny Elfman. Well, he's credited for the score of The Wolfman, but it gets a little bit muddy. So Elfman composed a score, and that was eventually rejected when the film was cut down about a half hour, effectively making the experience wall-to-wall music, which Joe Johnston found to be too repetitive.
Yeah, you can't lock a picture, score it, and then be like, we're gonna recut it. It's timed differently entirely, right? So that's rough.
If you're Danny Elfman, the next Tim Burton project is never very far away. So
No.
by the time they realized that his original score, wasn't going to work in its current state, he was then unable to compose a new score because he was already contractually obligated to work on Alice in Wonderland.
So what did they do? They just chopped his stuff up and like remixed it and sampled it and used what they wanted?
Kinda, but not immediately. So they originally decided to go with a completely new approach with a different composer, which necessitated extensive reshoots on top of everything else they needed to do. In an effort to speed up the film, they brought on Underworld composer and member of Tangerine Dream, Paul Haslinger. He handed in an electronic score that was ultimately deemed too inappropriate for the film's Gothic Victoria era setting.
Like, as much as I love how well this music fits this period, get Nine Inch Nails to do the soundtrack to the new Wolfman movie. Call him up.
Yeah, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross would be a fantastic choice.
I want to get my hands on that dark web. If you're out there, send us a copy of the score if you could find it, the E-score, the electronic score.
Yeah, with about a month before the film's release, they went back to Danny Elfman's original score, which was then retooled by additional composers, including Conrad Pope, who's the orchestrator on The Hobbit, Harry Potter, Star Wars, The Matrix, and Edward Shearmer, who was the orchestrator on License to Kill, Die Hard, and Lethal Weapon.
I'm so fascinated now because I wonder what they do. Do they go back to what Elfman wrote? Do they take what was already recorded?
They used as much of Danny Elfman's score as they could, and then they also provided additional scoring where they needed to.
Oh, so they kind of filled in some blanks if they had
Right.
to.
They were able to recycle a lot of it and then just kind of wrote original new material to make it all work.
You know something? There's something kind of great about this actually because it is so in line with what Universal used to do with their music.
Yeah, with the library music.
Let's just take music from that old movie and like let's take music from this movie we're doing, but the music's done. That movie's not done. Let's just use that music or like mix and match, shift it around, whatever we got to do to get it done. Like I would have been fine if they just had a soundtrack from a totally pre-existing film.
And to their credit, the score never seemed weird to me.
No,
It works.
And it made me think of Dracula 79 and it made me think of Coppola's Dracula. Like it made me feel like, oh, this movie could fit like sort of in a series with those movies or something.
Yeah, hell yeah. And this would have been really silly, but there were moments in the movie where I feel like they could have used the Lonely Man theme from the Incredible Hulk TV show and it would have worked.
Yeah, like because it worked on the Hulk.
It did.
It wasn't a joke then, you know, it wasn't until other shows started using it and making it a reference, but You're right. Like it had that same kind of tone.
So yeah, that's the story about the score. The Wolfman was released on February 12th, 2010 and grossed only $142 million against a budget of $150 million.
Was this supposed to be a Valentine's Day movie or something? Is this a love story? Like they're dropping it that week in February. I don't know about that marketing, man. I would have waited a month or two and been like, let's push for summer.
Yeah, I agree. I think this summer would have been good. There's enough action in here, enough violence that it could have worked, or October, around Halloween.
Who knows? I don't know what they were contending with during the summer of 2010.
The LA Times called it one of the costliest box office flops of all time.
Hard to believe.
When the Wolfman came to DVD and Blu-ray, it came with an unrated director's cut, which we've been talking about. That's the version we're most familiar with. Again,
Yeah.
17 minutes of additional footage.
Would love to see that in a theater if they ever revive this, like for an anniversary or something. Plus, let me just say, folks, like I got both copies on one disc for like $8 on Blu-ray. Like such a steal. Definitely worth an own.
According to Joe Johnston, the reason that 17 minutes was cut out to begin with was to push the story along so that audiences would get to the first Wolfman transformation sooner.
See, I don't like that logic because we lose character development, thus caring why this guy's turning into the Wolfman at all.
Right.
If we never saw Lawrence at work in his life and have that get it disrupted and upended, then we'd not understand like half of his like motivating factors. What is he getting back to? What is he left? What does he want more? Like when people refer to him as a famous actor, is that just bullshit? Are they mocking him? It's like, no, like you see, like he was actually a very famous actor at one point. I mean, maybe he's like, oh, if we have to kill a darling, like let's do that one and let's do it this way. So
yeah, so the two scenes that immediately come to mind as far as scenes that were removed and then later put back in are the scene on the train with Max von Sydow, and then there's a sequence where Lawrence is he's escaped from the asylum and he's on the lam and being hunted by the police and everything, and he sees a kid selling newspapers with his picture in it, and he like buys up all the newspapers. Yeah, you could take that scene out and the movie would be fine. Now I have to go back and revisit the theatrical cut to see what they took out because I'm so familiar with that director's cut.
Like the thing I like about the director's cut that I could see them losing for a theatrical version is like they linger, like in the way that Dracula 79 we talked about, like they linger on things like, oh, here's a shot of a guy walking across the moor, but like it's a wide shot of him walking for a long time. It's not like 3 shots of the guy from different angles and shit. Like Joe Johnston has like a certain visual language.
The settings for his movies really feel fleshed out. They really feel like real places. I mean, they shot on location, as we talked about.
It's as much a character for me, the location, as in those original films when we would talk about like a graveyard or a city street or like how the fog rolled in or something. Like I get it all here as well. I feel like there's as much attention to that detail as if that was like we have to act like it's a character.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think the movie is better for it. That's all my notes. All right, let's get into the movie now. I'm going to do my best to sort of differentiate the director's cut and the theatrical cut, but like I said before, we're not going to be able to guarantee that across this entire discussion. So, the beginning of the movie is really where a lot of the differences occur. In the director's cut, it opens with the old 1940s Universal logo, which I really, really enjoyed.
Yes, for us, the logo aficionados, we've been trying to keep track here and there, how it changes. Like that was a really nice touch and settled me in. Whereas in the theatrical cut, it is kind of more of a modern take on the logo. I mean, it's still affected with like moonlight, which is still, they did something, but it's like, wow. When I saw how they recreated one of the old-timey ones, I was very happy.
And it immediately made me remember when Stephen Sommers said that when he tried the old Universal logo in front of Van Helsing, it took people out of the movie. I think this kind of proves that false. I really enjoyed seeing the classic logo. I mean, it was an updated version of it, but it was definitely that classic 1941.
Totally perfect homage. And apparently, I guess the studios were right because Johnston tried it and it got taken out of his theatrical cut too.
Immediately begins with the old werewolf poem that we got in the original movie. Even a man who is pure as heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. They went back to the original version of that. And then we're right into the opening kill scene, which really kicks this movie off in a really spectacular way. It's 1891 in Blackmore. Just to give you a little bit of context, because we were talking about Francis Aberline, the Ripper murders were in 1888, so just 3 years prior.
Okay.
So that's where we are, but we're in Blackmore now, and Ben Talbot is being hunted through the grounds of the Talbot estate.
We don't know it's him. We don't know that this is the brother, and he's just sort of perusing the grounds when he is attacked. It's pretty vicious. Like, I was kind of surprised. like right off the bat by the first actual hit that he takes.
Yes, he takes two pretty quick slices across the torso and the face.
Yeah.
Immediately like heads into the Talbot family like crypt. Now in the director's cut it goes even further and we see a pretty gnarly death scene, but in the theatrical cut I think they cut that off and it goes right to the title card. It's a really awesome, gnarly, violent opening scene.
Yeah, I mean, even though they stop it in the theatrical cut, what they show is also shocking for the opening image of a movie to be that evisceration. Yeah, I like how it keeps going. It's kind of foreshadowing the importance of the crypt. Like, that's going to be really
Yes.
important later on. So maybe the brother might have known something. Like, it just, upon rewatching, it got me thinking about the bigger world and things that were happening before the movie started. So, like, yeah, I definitely love the setting, the scene. We have like the moors and the smoke and the fog rolling in and obviously the moonlight and everything. So it all looks on point too.
Once that scene concludes, like I said, we get the Wolfman title card there. Pretty awesome. Okay, so now depending on which version you're watching, I would say this is where the biggest deviation happens. I actually kind of prefer the director's cut version of this, even though it does slow things down. So we'll start with that, and then we can kind of discuss how the theatrical cut speeds up that particular part of the movie. Okay, so in the director's cut, Gwen Conliffe is attending a production of Hamlet that stars Lawrence Talbot. After the show, he's in the dressing room getting out of costume and all of that, and she comes to see him to tell him that his brother has gone missing. And she believes he may be in danger or dead because two other people had been found dead recently as well. The reason why I think this particular sequence is important to keep in is because this is where we get the foreshadowing of all the family drama. Because instead of being concerned about his brother's well-being, Lawrence is very hesitant to go back home to see his father. He is about to head over to America to perform Hamlet in America. And so he basically tells her to have a good night and he's not going to go home.
Right.
She does manage to convince him though. And so he takes a train back to Talbot Hall. And on the way, he encounters Max von Sydow as a mysterious passenger on this train who gives him the wolf cane.
I really like this stuff because it's great setup. Like they set up London, right? Okay. So like a place we're going to return to later, as opposed to just like a fresh location. His fame, like we get the sense that he's really famous, especially from like all the backstage things. I actually love what he's doing, what Benicio del Toro's doing as Hamlet. He's doing something different than Larry Talbot as Hamlet. I thought it was very interesting to see that. And it just fleshes out his character so much more, especially when he goes back home and they accuse him of being multiple personality because he's an actor. And to me, it was worthwhile. And that train ride, even in the theatrical cut, there is space for that scene. I felt it was so pivotal. It felt like such a great classic horror movie sequence, just such a mysterious scene, just kind of like, what is this setting up? I really enjoyed that. That out of everything, I think I missed the most.
Yeah, because in the original Wolfman, Larry buys the cane from Gwen's shop. He goes in there to talk to her and ends up leaving with a wolf cane. And then in the theatrical version of this Wolfman, he just has it with him on the train to Blackmore. And so this scene is necessary. It's mysterious. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it is fun to see Max von Sydow show up and be kind of cryptic, and then he just vanishes while Lawrence is asleep. Then he gets his cane. It's a really, really cool moment. I agree with you. I think they should have kept that in.
Yeah, I was really surprised because like it's Max von Sydow.
He shot for one day and that was it. And he just comes in and is Max von Sydow. Who can't love that?
It's a total Force Awakens kind of thing. He's this mysterious, pivotal character with an item that he gives to one of the main characters.
Yeah, so Lawrence gets to his ancestral home, Talbot Hall.
Should we mention that in the theatrical cut, everything we just talked about is truncated as a montage?
Yes. Okay, so if you haven't seen the director's cut, the Ben Talbot scene happens, then the title, and then Gwen is narrating this letter she's written to Lawrence telling him that his brother's missing and they need his help, and he's already on the train. It skips over almost all of that, and we don't learn about the family drama until much later.
Yeah, the only thing that kind of works with it, if you've seen the director's cut and you're watching the theatrical cut, the way that they cut the montage feels like one of his fever dreams that he has later. So like at least there's a consistency there with how they do the montage in the movie. But I was very surprised that they skipped over all of that, like all of it. I could understand like cutting it down, but it just required them to refilm the scene where Gwen and Larry meet. And so that it had to be like an insert later.
I really like how they meet at the theater and he's kind of a dickhead to her. And, so that complicates their arc.
Yes.
So
Right.
when he shows up not having met her and she's already at his house and they're meeting for the first time there, their relationship becomes much simpler. And so I'm always going to enjoy the more complicated version. They just kind of skip over all of that. Lawrence shows up at home. You see his dad for the first time, and immediately, because it's Anthony Hopkins, as we've talked about this performance already, it is just weird as shit from the beginning.
They take like living at Blackmore so seriously in the movie, in the sense that like it's olden times essentially. There's no electricity in this place. Like this place is miserable. It's this giant tomb basically. Like why is he still there is what's question. Probably well, we will understand it's to kind of keep himself away from everybody, but like he has clearly gone insane. Anthony Hopkins, like upon rewatching, it's very clear. But the first time I watched this movie, I was like, he's so eccentric. Maybe he could be a Wolfman too, but would they do that in this movie? I don't think they're gonna do that. But I love the performance. Like it's so intense. He's in 100% on this performance.
Yeah, and few actors could pull that off the way he does. He's one of the more perfect cast members.
It feels like his character understands the absurdity of everything before it's revealed to us. He's like, oh, just wait and see. Like, this is going to get nuts.
Yeah, he has been through the looking glass.
Yeah.
He has been a Wolfman since Lawrence was a child, all this time.
25 years, which we'll talk about. Might be my one kind of question. That's a little questionable, but I don't know if we want to talk about that yet.
But yeah, he's had 25 years to live with this reality, and you can imagine what that would do to a person. He has sort of crossed through the looking glass onto the other side, and he has this fun attitude where he believes he sees the world as it truly is, and we're all animals, and he's just going to embrace that animal side of him and all of that sort of nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, when we meet him, he's past the tipping point. Like something has clearly set him over the edge, and that's sort of like, I guess, going to be one of the mysteries of the film too.
Okay, so Lawrence learns that he is too late, that Ben has been found dead in a ditch. The current rumor spreading is that it had to have been some kind of animal or perhaps a lunatic. All we really know is the way that they found his body is so unnatural that they can't really explain it.
I love the sequence at the quote unquote morgue, or I guess butcher shack, where he goes to see his brother's body. And again, that is a very shocking corpse that we get to see. Like I was not expecting it to be like Evil Dead. They really went the extra mile with that one.
And it's what, like half a frame?
It still feels longer somehow.
Like you only get one glimpse of it. They don't cut back to it. It's like a real quick flash across the screen, and then that's it.
It looks like it's out of that movie Life Force or something. Like the life's been sucked out of it. You know, it looks like really deformed, and it's like blue and like scarred up, even though it's quick.
Yeah, it's really, really effective. Before we get too far, I do want to mention that we meet Singh, Sir John's servant. Singh is awesome.
He is way more than just the butler.
He's like Alfred.
Plus, it's more like he's here to watch this guy. The only one that knows what's really going on here.
You got to figure that in 1891, prior to that, Sir John spent time abroad, clearly, would have spent time in British India. But I do like that Singh is sort of treated like Alfred, where he's a warrior, right? He says later in the movie that, Sikhs are warriors of God. They're always ready to fight. And so he's an absolute badass. And I love his performance, what little we get of it. That's one of the few complaints I have, is that we just don't get enough Singh.
Well, when we see him, he's always like cleaning his guns,
Always.
polishing a knife or something.
After Lawrence views his brother's body, he heads to the local tavern where the villagers are now. It's like Gossip City over at the tavern. They're all drinking beer and just like, I think it was a lunatic. I think it was a beast. I think it was that bear over in the gypsy camp.
This felt like straight out of The Invisible Man. Like this had some James Whale's kind of tinge to it for me. Not all the way. They still held that, but it was that whole, like you said, the gossip, but everybody kind of like embellishing more and more and more. The one guy who tells the story about like 25 years ago, it was something ate all my sheep and half of my brother or something like that, you know? So I was kind of like, oh, I almost forgot like it was that long that the dad had been a wolf.
Yes.
Seems a little long, but we'll get there when I think he reveals the truth. I think we should talk about that more.
Towards the end of the scene, one of them starts talking about the Talbot specifically and how Sir John married one of those, I don't even know if I want to say it.
A derogatory term for one of the gypsy women.
He refers to Lawrence's mother with a slur about gypsies and calls her a whore, and that basically sets Lawrence off. He picks a fight with this dude, throws beer in his face, and they all realize what he was there for the entire conversation. So
it is so ballsy. Like, that is so different from the Lawrence in the original movie. Like, Larry in the first movie would have maybe just gotten up, let them know he was there, and then like walked out or something. But the way he is so hammered, and he's got all that emotional weight sinking in for being back, and his dad mocking him, being like, oh, the prodigal son returns, knowing that it is not what he wants him to be at all or anything. The way he picks that fight is amazing. I love how Benicio del Toro acts with his hands on his hips almost the entire movie, and he like leans over into the dude's face and everyone has to throw him out, and then the one guy turns around with the classic look on his face, like straight out of the original, like, that was Larry Talbot, it was.
fantastic scene.
Oh, that's when they talk about the bear too. Might have been the dancing bear.
The gypsy encampment formed 2 weeks prior, and that's when the trouble started. All of the stuff we've been hearing about, these other two people who were killed, Ben Talbot, it all started 2 weeks ago. And so they all assume that it's this dancing bear that the gypsies have that probably mauled these people. That's going to be important for a scene coming up. But for now, Lawrence heads back home, and he's got Ben's personal effects, everything that Sir John was going to have buried with him. He takes this stuff. Included with it is a pendant of Saint Columbanus, who was an Eastern saint and also a gypsy, as Sir John explains. That sort of leads to a discussion about Ben's connection to the gypsies. So basically the way it worked out is that Ben was sort of the intermediary between the town of Blackmore and this group of gypsies, and the town would pay the gypsies to keep trouble to a minimum, and in exchange, all the people from the town would come and get drunk and enjoy the gypsy women and blah, 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 blah. And so that was kind of the relationship, as Ben was the go-between between the two groups of people.
Is this in the sequence when they bring back the telescope and they're looking at the moon?
Yes.
Like, I love this because I was feeling the original vibes, and I knew it was kind of coming up, but he's talking to his son, and he's also like blowing out all the candles and at first, and then they go up and they look at the moon through the giant scope, but he puts on those funny little glasses too, like his moon looking at glasses. But that was just awesome, the way that they reincorporated that. You know, it's just there. There's no it's not like he's an astronomer. You don't have to be a peeping Tom or anything. Like,
right.
has this awesome giant scope in his house.
It's just visual symmetry, right? It's not the same scene, but we get another scene here with John and Lawrence speaking to each other with this telescope. And yeah, I also loved those glasses. In the past couple of years, I've acquired some tinted lenses because I wear glasses every day. And I got a couple with different colored tints just for fun. And I learned just how specifically yellow lenses can increase contrast. And so that's what he's doing. He's wearing these glasses just to see the moon better through the telescope.
I love it. He's like worshiping the moon. Anthony Hopkins.
For sure.
He's like, can you feel it, Lawrence? It speaks to you. Soon enough.
So then Lawrence decides he's going to stick around and he's going to find out what happened to Ben. And I think this is when he meets Gwen, and he tells her that he's going to stick around and investigate Ben's death and find out for her. Because that's really what she wants. She just wants to figure out what happened to him.
She's trying to leave too. This is the hardest place to get out of. What's wrong?
And then he eventually will send her away, and then she comes back again. As he's walking past his old childhood bedroom, we get a flashback.
That's right.
Of Ben and Lawrence as boys. boys. It's a pretty nightmarish flashback. Essentially, what we learn is that Ben walked out into the backyard and discovered that his mother had slit her own throat.
Yeah, he finds Sir John over the mother, like
Correct.
holding the mom, and she has her throat slit. Yeah, so it appears that she has committed suicide, and that Larry has discovered this in the middle of the night. That is the root of his trauma.
Right. And then that led to Sir John sending Lawrence away. He sent him to an asylum where he stayed for a year before then being shipped off to America to live with his aunt.
Where he became a famous actor.
So that's where he's been like all this time. I remember in the original 41 Wolfman, Lawrence is returning from being away for a really long time. Also, he's returning because his brother has died. But it's a completely different situation. It had more to do with Lawrence being the second son. You know, like, in a family like that, the first son always has all the responsibilities. Second son
can kind of go out into the world, right?
Right. So he spent all that time abroad and is just now returning after his brother died. But here, his reason for coming home is a little bit more complex.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely got some things he wants to work through, whether he realizes it or not. It's just it's forcing him back so that he can get through all this childhood stuff, which also could be an unreliable narrator. We will come to learn that this might not be the entire truth.
So Gwen decides she's going to head back to London now that she knows that Ben is dead and that Lawrence is going to be investigating that. There's no reason for her to stick around. So she heads back to London. Sir John happens to mention that maybe Lawrence should pause the investigation until the following day, just in case his theory involving the full moon and a lunatic is correct.
Yeah, there's a fair warning.
In hindsight, yeah, I think this is John. I mean, he knows, but I think he's trying to protect Lawrence.
Yeah, because at this point, he's out. He's out and about. Like, he's not locking himself up anymore.
Lawrence ignores that advice and heads into the gypsy encampment anyway to find out where this St. Columbanus pendant came from. And one of the little gypsy boys tells him he's got to speak to Maliva.
We see the bear, which is a great CGI bear.
Yes, as the angry villagers who are convinced this bear had something to do with the recent deaths, they come storming in. There's our Rick Baker cameo, by the way. As that's happening, they're arguing with the gypsies and the police, and like they want to kill the bear. Meanwhile, Lawrence is talking to Maliva about the pendant.
I love the look on the bear's face where he's like, I would never do that.
Like, so two animals are wholly CGI'd, right? One is this bear, and then later on there's like a deer that they use for bait to lure the Wolfman out. And like, again, like all the CGI in this movie, not great, but it was 2010.
I thought it was really good. I felt they sold it, especially the deer, because of the way like it was shot in silhouette. But the bear shot wasn't too long, and it was more for a gag. So,
Yes.
I understood that.
So as they're arguing about the bear, of course, our Wolfman makes his appearance. And it's just chaos in this encampment. People are shooting guns in every direction. One guy does get accidentally shot.
There is friendly fire. Yes, there is. There's the general panic. Like everybody is just scattering, including the bear.
And there's some really gnarly kills in this scene. I mean, we don't have to go into every single one, but like, I love the constable, right? He's kind of peering into this cart and the claws come out and come through his jaw.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good one.
A lot of that, like a lot of gore, a lot of like going through the entire body, like sticking his arm through your stomach and coming out like the other side.
Yep.
A lot of dismemberment. I was actually very surprised how long it kept going on.
I love the dude in the tent who gets ripped through the wall of the tent really quickly. That one's in the trailer. It's fantastic.
And then Larry like wanders over to like that weird Stonehenge.
So he saves a woman from the wolf attack, if you remember. He's got his rifle and he's just running and gunning, and then he sprints, knocks her out of the path of the wolf, but then he sees this little boy head into the mist. And yeah, it's like a weird Stonehenge kind of altar kind of configuration.
Yeah, that was cool. Whatever that was interesting.
Yeah, so it's real foggy like a werewolf movie should be. He manages to get this kid to run away, but then, of course, the Wolfman attacks him from above. It's a real quick sequence, but he's quickly saved by some of the villagers.
The gypsies save him because they're sewing up his neck, right?
Yes, they show up with their rifles and shoot the werewolf. Then Maliva sews him up. And they have this debate about whether or not they should let him die because they all know he's about to become a werewolf. This is where we get kind of a new rule. I don't think we encountered this one before in the old movie.
Okay.
She says or indicates that only somebody who loves him can free him, can set him free.
Oh, well, that seemed familiar, right?
If they were to let him die, he would be damned to hell. So he has to be killed by somebody who loves him. Is that from the original movie as well?
I thought it was. Did his dad kill him?
Yes.
Yeah, right. So
Yes.
it turned out to be like someone who loved him. Maybe it's like a twist on one of the rules. I don't know. Whatever it is, like I don't mind it. It's a cool sort of reason for them to keep him alive. Yes, he's gonna freak out for a few moons, but like when he's put down, he'll be at total rest, and and that's probably best.
I actually really liked that. I mean, it's been so long since we last talked about the Wolfman. I couldn't remember if that was new or not, but it felt new.
It's kind of a cool way to say that, like, hey, we could try to let him die, but he won't die unless like someone that loves him will kills him. That could have been like maybe a cleaner way to portray it. But
So once he is stable, he is transported back to Talbot Hall, where he is unconscious for days. We don't know exactly how many days, but we do know that it's a pretty lengthy period of time, maybe a week or so. And by the time he wakes up, his scar is very much healed. The doctor who's been tending to him says like a week ago, I would have said you would never use that arm again.
it's crazy. I was thinking how like, oh, I mean, I guess there's like no hospital. Like it's really a coin toss if he's gonna live or die. He got attacked. We don't know by what. It could be rabies, like all this kind of shit. Like what if it just was rabies? He would die. Would they be able to cure that back then? Would they know? Like maybe they think he's turning into a Wolfman because of the rabies. But I'd love when he's recovering and we get that like he can see sort of the twinkle in the moonlight. That was kind of nice just to give the idea that his senses are changing. I think he has a couple moments after he's fully healed where like he's got the Superman problem where like things are too loud all the time. He can like smell you coming, I bet. Yeah, I like this whole thing where like he's back at full strength and kind of can't explain it.
Yeah, there's a moment where some guys come to question him and take him in. He mentions being able to hold back 3 of them by himself. So he's got some super strength, which is cool. He starts to gain the super hearing. When he's like in bed still recovering, he has this vicious nightmare sequence, another one of those montages. We get to see like the feral child.
Oh, yeah.
Which will be explained later.
Yeah, he has all those glimpses, the premonition, the wolf like jumps in front of his face. That was kind of fun.
Around this time, now that Lawrence is back up on his feet, this is when we meet Inspector Francis Aberline. He shows up in town to investigate these attacks out in Blackmore and questions Lawrence. In a not so subtle way, indicates that Lawrence might be a person of interest due to his history of mental illness, which doesn't go too well.
Yes. That's when he's like, well, you're an actor, so how can we know you're not acting right now? And it's like, this is the guy they sent after Jack the Ripper. Like, I love that shit, though. It's like, because it's just the mind has not basically, I guess, advanced to where we are now as far as like criminology and shit. So they don't know really like how to inspect this. He's like, can I see your hands? It's like, oh, you don't have claws? You didn't do it. Like, I actually quite like this scene because the actors are great. You could tell they're loving their roles. Like, I feel like they're really inhabiting this, especially I'm loving Hugo Weaving. But also it's like, it's such a cool take on, like, I'm watching a lot of Justified right now. Okay. And like, such a cool take on the cop comes to the suspect's house, knocks on the door, just wants to talk for a few minutes. I got a couple questions. I'm going to lightly threaten you within the confines of, my parameters or whatnot. But I ain't really saying nothing, and just kind of put a little fear into the guy, hoping he slips up or something. Like that kind of feels like this sequence. But the difference is like, we know we're on Larry's side because we know like he didn't do it.
One interesting thing that I learned from the dialogue in here, I mean, it's not really super important. I just thought it was interesting. Basically, Aberline's reasoning to suspect Lawrence, or part of it anyway, is that there are no more natural predators left in England capable of inflicting the wounds that they found on the victims. And so while it might seem like an animal might be the obvious answer. Given that information, a lunatic or somebody with some mental illness seems more plausible in that light. And so I thought that was interesting. I had never really considered that there wouldn't be, vicious predators left in England, but yeah, that totally tracks.
That's logical. That's like a logical conclusion. Like he just got done dealing with Jack the Ripper. He's seen unnatural things done to a body. So one would think he would be more about like killings like these are on the rise, like maniacs are becoming more common. That's why I'm here. I'm here to suss that out.
It's interesting if you compare these events to like the Ripper killings, right? This is what Aberline is faced with, right? He's just come from that. Now he's investigating this. What's interesting about the Ripper murders is how, for lack of a better word, how civilized they are. They suspected that it was a doctor of some kind because of how tidy they were, as horrific as they were. They also had a professionalism about them, with the exception of the final one, Mary Kelly, who was just completely butchered all to hell. So, I mean, there's been debate about whether or not that was actual Ripper or not. Who knows? Yeah, I think that's interesting to have this guy who was investigating Ripper come to Blackmoor and investigate werewolf killings or, grisly murders.
I almost wish they went just a scene or two deeper with that. Like, I wish we saw him sent from London instead of arrive in Blackmoor. That would have just done a little extra, because the parallel there is a lot of fun.
To have that scene where he's just coming off the Ripper murders and being sent out into the country, that could have helped clue people in as to how important he is as a figure in England. I still love this scene just as you do. Yeah. It's a really great scene between two incredible actors. So then Lawrence soon discovers that his bite scar has disappeared completely. He's starting to buy into this werewolf business, I think, because he immediately goes to Gwen's room after they had just had a really nice time skipping stones out by the river, and he tells her she has to pack her things in the middle of the night and leave because he doesn't believe it's safe for her anymore.
Yeah, they go and they skip stones and they have like a little date, kind of. I think he has a couple more visions maybe, and that's when everybody comes for him. Like, that's when, like, the priest comes with the dudes on the horses with ropes, and they try to quarter him. His dad comes out just shooting a shotgun into the air, and he's like, I missed intentionally, but I didn't have to. This is my property from here to there. I have been well within my rights to murder you all, and if you come back, I'm gonna. And I was like, holy shit. All right, he's definitely found targets for the next full moon.
I love that Singh, his manservant, is up on the roof, and he'll kill the next 8 of you.
That was fun.
Love that. And then the whole, you're not the only one in this family who can act. Yeah, it's a great scene. Like, every single time Anthony Hopkins comes onto the screen, I'm so excited because he's so much fun to watch. And this scene is one of my favorites of his. Lawrence decides to send Gwen away back to London for her protection. That very night, he heads into the old family crypt, and that's where he discovers this weird shrine to his mother. There's lots of candles, there's a portrait of his mom, and then there's this chair, this like beaten up chair with like arm and leg restraints and a head restraint. This is sort of what I was referring to before about how I don't love that this movie really telegraphs that Sir John is a werewolf, because like that's the big clue right there, is he's strapping himself to this chair and just waiting it out.
Yeah, this scene could have come later, because I love it so much. I mean, it looks amazing, and it's got no dialogue for the longest amount of time. Like, Larry follows his dad like through the house. His dad's wearing the tiger robe again. Yeah, he goes into the crypt and we see his mom's like amazing marble coffin. It's so crazy. It looks like her, like it's just like crafted like out of marble, like a statue laying down. And there's what I always love, man. We get the secret room. There's a secret dungeon underneath the crypt, and he goes down, and that's where he finds like the shrine of mom and the dad's chair. And this is maybe where we should talk about the whole like he's been a werewolf for 25 years, because I feel like that's just a little too long to kind of survive all this. I mean, unless he wanted to be a werewolf, which it doesn't seem like he did up until now. Like, it just seems like now it's like at a point where he's lost total control. He killed his one son, he's about to kill another son. He killed his wife. Like I could see him kind of being like totally insane at this point. I don't know how it could have gone. I mean, maybe the mom was the werewolf and he killed her and then he went on his little pilgrimage. Even if they did it for 15 years, Larry was a teenager, you could have still worked with the scarring of the mind and the trauma and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
I mean, the best I can figure the timeline here is at some point years ago, either before Lawrence was born or when he was very young, his father was traveling the world, had that experience with the feral child up in the mountains, became affected by the werewolf curse. I mean, how long do you hide that from the family, right? I think he probably killed his wife by accident.
Yeah, I believe so.
And then for Lawrence's own safety, sent him to an asylum and sent him to America.
But what about the first son? The first son didn't see anything, so there's nothing to worry about. You can hide it from him as long as possible, which I guess he did until his son decided he wanted to leave. And I guess Sir Talbot's like, I can't allow that right now because I need you to help me be not a werewolf. We don't know precisely what was going on. It seems like there was some kind of blowout between them or something.
That's how I think it happens. Lawrence witnessed it, and so he sent him away. And then with just John and Ben and Singh was the guy who was keeping everybody safe. So I could see how that could be managed for 25 years.
I just wonder how long I would last. I think 5-10 years in, I'd be like, Singh, you know what? Tonight, just do it. Just take the silver bullet. Once I'm strapped in, once I've transformed, just do it this time.
I would love to know how quickly he'd learn to love it, right? Because that's ultimately why he sticks around.
Well, it almost feels like a penance to him because he did murder his wife without realizing, right? That's why he's got the creepy shrine. Like there's nice shrines, and then there's this shrine, which is like Texas Chainsaw Massacre worthy shrine.
Yeah, it's a weird scene. I think there's some really good essential information that we get from it. Again, I think it telegraphs Sir John as a werewolf.
Some nice lines. He goes to Larry, he goes, I'm dead in the eyes. And then one day he goes, the beast will have its day.
That's right.
Some nice one-liners. I think he says that one a couple times.
But this is really where the transformation happens. John sort of ushers Lawrence back out into the hallway, shuts the door, locks himself into this room, and then basically wishes his son well as the moon shines down and Lawrence transforms into the werewolf for the first time. This is such a good scene, and it's definitely aided by the shadow, right? Because as we learn later on in the light, the transformation doesn't hold up as well. But I love some of these shots. There's one where it catches his reflection in the puddle, and like you see his face change in the water. His arms and legs are morphing into dog limbs. Just a really cool scene.
Yeah, great coverage. All the little shots are perfect. Like I love the way the sequence fits together. Like again, it's not like a oneer. Like we don't need to see him transform all in one shot. Like I'm more excited seeing like a shot of the foot, a shot of the eyes, a shot of the hand. He came crawling. You could feel the pain too. And the sound effects are great, but like the cracking of his bones readjusting and reforming, like all that stuff is really great. It feels like a pivotal moment. And this was a really fun first transformation.
Yeah, and it goes right into an action scene. So he goes running out of the tomb and into this scene where a bunch of those hunters, all those guys that came to the house earlier to come get him, have strung up like a deer as to bait him to come out. They've dug these like big holes in the ground and then covered them, like those sorts of tracks, right?
They did that to a mummy once. They just tried to dig like a big hole and cover it up.
I think you're right. They definitely did the same thing in Van Helsing. They built that big hole, but it backfires immediately, right? They all start like panicking. They start falling into the hole themselves.
Yeah.
And then our Wolfman kills every single person in this scene.
So this has one of the freaking coolest gags that I've seen in a long time.
I think I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, the Wolfman is just eviscerating people and slashing the hell out of them. And there's like blood flying. And all of a sudden, just like an arm comes flying out of the pit. It lands and there's still like I guess, energy and stuff in the severed arm, and it shoots the gun it's holding, and the gun fires off. Like, I was like, whoa, that's a great bit. That was awesome. That had to have been storyboarded. Like, that's like some of the cool shit you get when you have Joe Johnston, because he knows, like, oh, this is how to sort of set up and pay off a sequence.
Yeah, and he's almost framing these scenes like a comic book, right? Like some of these shots I feel like are very much like straight out of a comic book. And I love the sequence where it's like the last guy in the group. He runs into this bog and then goes to shoot himself in the head, but he's out of bullets, and the Wolfman just decapitates him with one swipe.
That was so great. Like, there's lots of heads roll in this movie, but like
A couple, yeah.
Like, I just like the way that it's set up. There's all these nice gags. It's not like you can't tell what's really going on, but you can tell a lot of people are being killed and there's bodies like flying all over the place. It's like, no, like, this guy is great. Like, he runs out, he's shooting, and he's like, I'm done for, and I'd rather take myself out. And then he gets like the worst death because like he has to see the werewolf chop his head off. I appreciate that more. I feel like we don't get a lot of that as much, and especially since like the tone of this movie kind of shifted drastically without feeling it really. Like it's kind of wild how well that all this action is fitting within what has up until now been mostly, except for the gypsy attack, which is also similar to this, it's been mostly quiet and slow and very kind of calm, and then there are these like crazy bursts of action sequences.
Yes. I've watched the director's cut a couple times this week, and I think because of that, I was just kind of getting like a little antsy waiting for the action sequences, but that's probably my own fault having watched it a bunch of times to prep for the show. I think that you're right in that these scenes, all the setup is so important, and because we've got really good actors, it is really good stuff. And then we kind of earn these action moments, right? We earn the gypsy camp scene, then we get this particular scene, and in each scene, everybody gets like their own unique death. You can understand what's happening. You can follow everything, all thanks to Joe Johnston. I think you're spot on with that. Guy really knows how to orchestrate these sorts of chaotic moments.
Yeah, and it's not like I feel he's necessarily trying to disarm me by lulling me to sleep or anything like that, Like, I feel there's other movies guilty of those kinds of things, but I'm more like, I'm just getting into it.
He's interested in not just telling an effects-heavy movie. He doesn't just want to, let's get to the Wolfman stuff. He wants to tell a complicated family story, and I think he largely succeeds. But what that means is that we're going to spend, 45 minutes to an hour dealing with that stuff before we get to the Wolfman reveal.
But what makes it so great for me is the performances, like especially Anthony Hopkins and Hugo Weaving. I mean, I love Emily Blunt too, but she's doing a great job, but she has the worst job as far as like her character is just like like very worried all the time, very kind of like kind of feels like just wants this all to be over. I wish there was maybe an extra dimension to that.
Yeah, I think on the page, this Gwen Conliffe is not as fleshed out as the original Gwen Conliffe.
Right. Yeah. Because we don't even know about her store until like kind of the end of the movie. If we just heard like, I have to get back to London, I run a business. It's like, whoa, it's like 18 whatever, and you're a female business owner.
Yeah, Evelyn Ankers had a lot to work with on the page for the original movie. Here, I think Emily Blunt is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, so I think she deserves a lot of the credit there. I think that's maybe one of the flaws of this movie. Although she does get more to do later in the movie. She kind of becomes a detective in her own way. Up until this point, she doesn't have much except that she's the widow of Ben Talbot and is kind of being sent back and forth to London and Blackmore and all of that.
What also is kind of weird is that like it's just a smaller cast of characters than most of these monster movies, it seems too. So, like you only really have 3 or 4 people. Anyway, they're trying to expand the cast a lot in this movie, which I think is good, but still, they could have used a couple more characters, I think.
The following morning, Lawrence wakes up on his property. His dad shows up, and Lawrence is covered in blood. His clothes are destroyed.
Oh, it's not just blood. It's like you could see
Gore.
like brain and stuff. It's horrible. It's like he was at that dance club in Blade.
And so John tells him, Lawrence, you've done terrible things. Just as Francis Aberline and the local cops show up to take him into custody. So now John is so ready to just hand his son over and say, you were right. My son is mentally unwell and, needs to pay for his crimes.
Dude, this asylum stuff is horrifying because it's probably all based on real stuff. He even did the water dunk to Electro Electro in Amazing Spider-Man 2, you know, like, so it has to be rooted somewhere in history if it's still popping up in like superhero movies and things. That dunk tank, I don't know, man. Like, I wouldn't have survived that.
I've said on this show before, old-timey medicine is frightening to me. That's what's really going to upset me. And I have a note. I wrote a note during this scene. Most horrifying sequence in the whole movie.
You got to check out the HBO series The Nick, based
Yes.
on 1900 Knickerbocker Hotel in New York City. It is a horror show.
This old-timey medicine really is the most off-putting stuff for me. The ice bath is, I mean, it's such a great visual. The way they shot that scene is really effective. I love the hallucinations.
You have to really do that. You have to strap Benny DT to a chair and dunk him. I mean, it's clearly it's not going to be ice water. Chunks of ice looked a little like props and stuff, but like he's still got to like physically be there and do that.
It's really well done. I love that it gets kind of trippy. He starts to hallucinate. He goes through shock therapy.
Yeah. They torture him. They drug him. They're just pumping him full of drugs.
This is where he was as a child, so I can only imagine how horrifying it was 25 years previously.
Yeah, when he was only like 10 or something like that. I can't imagine what he went through then, but like the guy's like, welcome back, young laddie. We got like a future Nazi here. This is like a Mengele stereotype here.
Yeah, his name's Dr. Henniger, and he mentions how much he regrets seeing him back there, but they're going to cure him.
All he'll say is, where's my father? Where's my father? Like, he won't stop saying that. So they're like, clearly he's insane.
Speaking of John Talbot, as Lawrence is back in his padded room, recovering, he is chained to the wall. John shows up, and this is like the confessional sequence. This is where we get the whole backstory to Sir John and his trip to India.
Yes.
He was on a hunting expedition in the Hindu Kush, and he was bitten by a boy infected with lycanthropy.
He goes, lycanthropy. Do you know that word? I heard tell of a strange creature up in the mountains. So I pursued and went into this dark cave where I found the strange young boy, the feral boy, and he bit me. He did, Lawrence. It's so great. He's like, I don't know if it's like a power trip he's on now. Is it that his son, does he feel like Larry ruined everything because he found them that night, right? That he found his dad over his dead mother. Like, does he have this resentment? Is he like, why did you have to come back? And like, because you're back, I'm going to treat you horribly.
No, I think it's almost the contrary. He's come to understand lycanthropy as a gift. And at the very least, he has a scapegoat for his own crimes.
That's part of the gloat. Because like, how much can Larry really understand in the state that he's in? He's curled up like a fetus on that bed, drooling his brains out, and his dad is like revealing the penultimate truth to him. And it's like, what is registering and how much is just driving him crazier?
I do get a sense that John would love to rule Blackmore as father and son, but if that's not the way Lawrence wants to play it, you know, he hands him the razor blade and is like,
that's right.
You know, if you can't handle it, here's your out.
There's so much happening in this speech, this monologue. The situation between his brother and Gwen comes and Sir John sort of becomes infatuated with her, right? Because it reminds him of his wife. And so when they decide to leave, that's sort of the falling out. And that's why he takes out his son. Yeah.
I kind of get the sense that he loves Gwen in that way too. Like he's going to have her also. He leaves the razor for Lawrence.
Which is wild that he got that into the asylum in the first place.
Oh, I don't think security was very strict at the time, especially not for somebody who owns as much land as Sir John Talbot. A knight? He's a knight. How bad could he be?
But Larry is considered a lunatic. He can take that razor and slice his way out without becoming a werewolf. The guy's a brute.
Yeah, something tells me John has some really powerful persuasion. That night is when Dr. Henniger does a whole lecture with Lawrence as his teaching aid.
Yeah, well, his subject. This again, dude, this is like the old operating theaters where people would watch the operation. I mean, I understand it's like you could do that for a learning experience, you know, but I think anybody could have shown up that night and just been like, I'm going to see the operation tonight, you know? I wonder what he's going to do tonight. Like, is it going to take off an arm? Is he going to replace his heart?
Yeah, it's a really cool visual. You don't really see the operating theaters anymore. And I mean, this feels like straight out of the original Universal monsters, like Frankenstein, right?
Yeah.
So I love this visual. And so as Dr. Henniger's back is to Lawrence, he's going on and on about, you know, how crazy his patient is. And Lawrence is just like, you're a moron. I'm going to kill everybody in this room.
Yeah.
So Henniger's like, what's going to happen is he's going to see the moon, see that he doesn't become a werewolf, and that will be his first step towards being cured of this affliction.
Yeah, and as he's saying that, the opposite is happening. Like Larry is transforming, and the entire audience is watching it in horror, and you get an awesome version. I wonder if this is like one of the first versions of Look Behind You, where they're all like, look behind you, and the guy's like, what are you talking about? What is this? What are you trying to do? I never heard of this before. And then he turns around, and yeah, he sees that Larry is indeed a werewolf. He's a wolfman for sure.
This is maybe the most chaotic of the big kill scenes because there's a lot of people, there's a lot of hacking and slashing, but I like the chaos here. We've gotten two really well orchestrated scenes of this sort of stuff. I like that this is just absolute pandemonium. I love that he goes after the guard.
The guy that helped to torture him like the entire time. Yeah, it's like he was waiting to get that guy. But what I also think works so well about this sequence is the buildup. Right?
Yeah,
because
yeah.
like they wheel him in and he's all bound and gagged and it's like really dehumanizing and they are treating him like an animal. But the transformation is, I actually think this is really cool. You get to see it again in pieces and stuff. And I understand it's like got more light on it. So it's a little more obvious that it's CGI, but I still really like the shots they use, the way that it's done. I love the way the Wolfman looks inside in the light, in his slashed clothes, just running amok. And I think like part of why the pandemonium works so well is because of the way the transformation was done. Like he is strapped down, so he cannot move. All of the lack of that action is like released once he escapes. So I really like that about the scene.
And from a conceptual standpoint, there's a lot I really like about this transformation. There's a couple shots in there that if the CG was a little bit better, it would be absolutely perfect. One in particular that jumps out to me is like his head goes straight back and you see his mouth, the canines come ripping through to like his mouth expands to make room for these big fangs. And that's so awesome. The feet ripping through his shoes. In a storyboard, this sequence is absolutely fantastic. It's just limited by the CG that was available at the time, right? So we're watching this way later, and I don't like to hold it against it.
Once he's in full suit, I appreciate that. I appreciate they had the confidence to say, no, this suit is working.
Yeah, can't say it enough. Love Wolfman in clothes.
And he's loose in London. The old-timey double-decker bus was hilarious.
He kills pretty much almost everybody in that room. Francis Aberline manages to escape. He throws Dr. Henniger out the window. He gets impaled on the fence, which is pretty cool. And then he just goes taken off into the city.
I love when everyone runs out and sees him impaled on the fence and they're like, oh my God, this is not common.
But I love the rooftop chase. I think that's like the first time we really get a good look at the Wolfman running on four legs. Like he goes from running on two legs to running on four.
Inspector's great. He's just shooting in public. He's just like blasting at the rooftops. He's like, everybody get the hell out of here. It felt so modern. It felt like Beverly Hills Cop for a second.
The double-decker bus is so funny. I don't even know if that's legitimate. Like, did they have early double-decker buses in 1891? I don't think so. It was a horse-drawn double-decker carriage, wasn't it?
Was it? It appeared to me to have some kind of contraption moving it along, but it could have been a horse-drawn double-decker carriage, which is even crazier to me if it wasn't like some kind of steampunk fakery that they did just for the film.
I just for the fun of it, I Googled it, and the first French double-decker bus was brought into service in Paris in 1853, and it was drawn by horses.
Okay.
So yeah, okay, not as wild as we thought.
But still cool. There is one of those in The Mummy Returns, and so there's one here.
There's one here. Of course, it tips over and everybody's trapped inside. And that sequence, I doubt it, but I wonder if for that movie, what is it, the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre that came out a couple years ago, there's a whole scene on a bus where like all these tourists are trapped.
Oh, right. It's like the rave bus.
Yes. It kind of reminded me of that. Just like a werewolf loose on an overturned double-decker bus. Classic.
Dude, I fear the bus sometimes. Like, it's so confining. There's that terrifying shot at the beginning of the Dawn of the Dead remake where Sarah Polley stopped in traffic, and in front of her she sees like the bus, and she could just see through like the back window someone getting like eaten by a zombie. I was yeah, buses are good horror.
So yeah, I love this whole city chase sequence. By the end of it, Aberline is now fully aware of what they're dealing with, and all he has to say is, God help us.
Yeah, this poor bastard, like, who's going to believe this guy? He's famous for not catching Jack the Ripper, and now he's going to be running around screaming Wolfman. but he's right.
So now they know it's Lawrence Talbot.
Oh, there's that great shot of the Wolfman at night under the bridge.
Well, there's two great shots. There's the one under the bridge. He drinks
He's, like,
from the
drinking.
river. Yeah. That's at the very end of the sequence. But I also love the moment where he's on the rooftops and he like howls at the moon on the edge of this statue. Was it a gargoyle?
Yeah. Maybe that's why they brought it to London to add some more of that gothic look to it, because it really works with the Wolfman where he's like clutched to a gargoyle or something like that, or like he's in that type of architecture. Like it's just nicer to see him in a more populated area than out in the countryside all the time, being hunted in the woods. So it's like from the woods to the big city, back to the woods.
Yeah, I absolutely love the juxtaposition of like this old country folklore brought into the metropolitan area. And then Lawrence like ends up under the bridge. The next morning he is a wanted man. There's a fun moment where he sees a newsie just out there selling newspapers, and it's got his big ugly mug right on the front page, and so he buys up all the newspapers. He ends up going into Gwen's antique shop. This is where we learn she has an antique shop.
Dude, so great they brought that in. And I just, again, wish we just at least heard about it earlier, where like when she's, at least in the director's cut, when she comes to London, she can be like, if you need to catch me, I'll be at my shop until like a later date and all this kind of like come by the shop. And then they could have had a conversation there. It's just because here it feels more like a weird Easter egg, because like if you don't know the history, you'd be like, is she April O'Neil? Like what's with this antique shop? Like what's going on with this? But instead, like we know that it's a callback.
Yes. I love that they included this. I could have used a little bit of an explanation, but we don't need it. It's like the scene with the telescope, right? It's visual continuity, having something from the original movie kind of brought into this.
But it also said so much about her character, especially like I could imagine the movie when it was made back, the original movie, having this female business owner kind of thing, which I'm sure existed in the real world at the time, but wasn't as commonly portrayed on screen. It could have been cool just to mention it earlier, just to sort of fortify that she has a little more urgency like that.
In this scene, Lawrence tells Gwen what's up. I am what they say I am. And she at this point becomes a detective herself. She is going to do whatever she can to save Lawrence from this affliction.
Does he tell her here? Is this the way he tells her? I think there's some kind of line where it's like, if all these bad things exist, like good things might exist too, like magic and God and stuff like that.
She says that.
Yeah, I was like, that's a good outlook. That's a very nice way of looking at this.
Yeah, she doesn't see it as this death sentence that he does. She's like, if werewolves exist, that means all these other, like magic exists and everything else. And she's going to find the cure for this lycanthropy.
If I'm not mistaken, they lock lips. They kiss?
They do, I believe. Yeah, this is sort of like where their relationship comes to fruition. It's been building up to this point. I mean, we haven't said a whole lot about it up till now, but it has been steadily working its way in that direction.
We didn't mention she visited him at the asylum as well. Like, I don't know if he remembered that, but she showed up there. And like sort of a fever dream, at least. Like maybe she wasn't really there, but he pictured her in the room. And I wasn't sure as a viewer if she was really there, but she could have been there. So that also just adds to the fact that like she cared about him.
He escapes, he takes off, and he becomes a fugitive almost to the end of the movie. And then Aberline shows up and wants to question her. She knows where he is or knows something about it. So
I love the heavy rain in this sequence. That's a nice touch. I wish there was a little more of that. But this is also why I love the stuff with him performing in the way in the beginning of the director's cut, is because Larry Talbot's famous. There's this famous actor who just like murdered a bunch of people. I don't think like without that stuff in the beginning, it really sinks in. But here to me, I was like, they're looking for a famous guy. They don't even need a newspaper.
Yeah, they know exactly who he is and they're going to hunt him down. That scene is coming. But in the meantime, there's like a montage where Gwen kind of is like researching lycanthropy, trying to find this cure. Ultimately, she does go find Maliva. She finds the gypsy encampment, this wherever they've moved on to. And this is where she learns there's no cure, that the only thing she can do is kill Larry, like be the person who loves him, who will save him. She doesn't say anything about killing him. She's very cryptic about it. Like, you know what I mean, right?
It is just to reiterate for the audience that like only someone that loves him is going to be able to kill him.
Yeah, and she's like, you know what I mean, to set him free, right?
Yeah, and then she does the thing where she puts her fingers against the head in a gun motion.
Okay, so now we have our pieces all set for the finale, the climax here. Aberline is assembling his search party, and they all have orders to shoot on sight, there's not going to be any hemming and hawing. There's no saving him. He is a criminal. He's a werewolf who has murdered many people at this point, and they're not going to take any chances. Lawrence returns to Blackmore. It is super creepy because there are no lights on, no candles. It's just dark inside. We see a great jump scare where we see Singh's corpse attached to the wall or a door.
Singh's corpse, which looks like it's been defiled for days, it doesn't look like he just died that morning.
No.
Which means that there's no holding back Sir John anymore at all. Not even if he wanted to be.
Right.
No one's there to lock him up.
Correct. Lawrence grabs Singh's silver bullets and then goes to look for his dad with the shotgun.
And it's time to unleash the beast.
John is in their, sitting room, I guess you would call it, playing the piano, the same room with the telescope. This is like his megalomaniacal monologuing moment. This is where he just kind of is full insane, has no intention of being restrained anymore, is going to live the rest of his life as a beast.
Yeah, he's completely given in and gone over to the other side. And I guess that's part of it, is like you can try to fight it for as long as possible, but eventually like it's going to take over. And one could imagine like maybe he's not going to turn back into a human one day. That's what I was thinking. Like that would have been kind of cool if it's like we don't know that and it's not part of the lore or anything, but maybe that's where I would take a movie where it's like he would just be like, I'm just going to give myself over completely and like I'm never going to turn back. I'm just going to go somewhere where I can be a werewolf forever. And like that would be kind of boss in my mind. But this is really great. Just the idea, I feel, of like a father and son like going at it like this. It's like the craziest version of like I could take my old man.
Yeah, hell yeah. It certainly does become that. So Lawrence unfortunately realizes that the silver bullets were useless. John reveals that he knew all about them like years ago, had the powder removed and didn't tell Singh. So they've just been duds the entire time. And so now it becomes a physical altercation. They start as men and then they become wolves. And it is a badass wolf fight.
Yeah. I appreciate that Anthony Hopkins ripped his shirt off so I could tell them apart a little bit.
Yeah, I am certain that is why they did that. But also it does track with his desire to just be the animal.
Yeah, but memory had me thinking he was a gray wolf. Is that crazy? Like I thought at the end he turned into a werewolf and he was like white or gray or something because he was an older man or something.
Yeah, he's kind of like a silver wolf, where Benicio is like a black kind of.
I've heard of a silver fox, but a silver wolf, Dan. But I like this fight a lot. Like again, because there's a lot of practicality going on. Mm-hmm. There's a fire. We set fire to the place. That's always a lot of fun.
It's like a sword fight at times.
Oh yeah.
There's things catching fire, but ultimately it's just one big wolf brawl that ends with Dad getting tossed into the fireplace and then decapitated.
The crazy one too.
Super cool.
Now I've got questions that aren't going to get answered about the death of this werewolf because he wasn't killed with silver.
Right.
Could you feasibly like sew his head back on like Immortal from Invincible and like it would grow together again? Like, do you not want to bury these two things together?
Yeah, I had the same thought because there's no silver and they always tell you the only way to kill a werewolf is silver bullet or what?
Although I might have just thought of it since it was another werewolf.
Maybe werewolf. Yeah, maybe another werewolf doesn't need silver to kill a werewolf.
Only another werewolf could kill another werewolf if you don't have a bit of silver on you.
Now I'm trying to remember how it ended in Werewolf of London. Did that end in a fire? It's been so long.
It might have. Yeah, that was a while ago. It definitely implied that there were two wolfmen, though.
Yes,
for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the only other time we encountered a wolf fight like this. So it's a really cool fight sequence.
Yeah.
John is dead, and as that fight wraps up, that's when Aberline and Gwen show up. Just as Aberline is about to shoot Lawrence, Gwen stops him, knowing that will damn him to hell, or damn his soul to hell. And it's like one of those moments where like that's the only good reason to stop him, right? And of course he's like, "What the fuck, lady?" Just like because the second that happens, the werewolf is on top of him. She takes the gun, and now he's getting mauled by this beast.
Yeah, he gets a big chunk taken out of his throat, like his neck he sinks right into the inspector's neck. Yeah, that was kind of hilarious the way you put it like that.
In any other context, right? So He manages to survive that encounter. The Wolfman chases Gwen through the woods, and they end at this spot, which we didn't really touch on earlier. I think we just glossed right over it, but it's a spot in the woods on the property where Ben and Lawrence would go to like hide as kids. It was like their safe space by this brook.
He spelt it out. They went there to get away from their dad.
And so this particular patch of land is very important to him.
Symbolic, yeah.
This is kind of like an American Werewolf in London moment.
How else can it go down? You know what I mean? Like, this is kind of the ending. This is the proper way to go.
But as he is about to attack, she gets his attention like, hey, Lawrence, it's me. It's Gwen. You know me.
Someone told her not to reason with it. Someone's like, he's still inside. Try and reason with him. You know, she's getting, and then at the end, she's finally trying to like get through to him, which I thought was a great touch. I think you could see his eye shifts at one point, right? That he might be in there somewhere.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's not super obvious, but I think if you're paying attention, you can definitely notice that. So as he is distracted by the mob that is chasing them through the forest, she points that gun straight at him, and at the last second fires a round straight into him, killing him, but not immediately. He does have a moment where he transforms back into a man and thanks her. Like, it was the only way, I think he says. It was the only way that it could have ended. He dies, she survives, and Aberline might be a werewolf now.
We get such a hard out. So again, I did not remember it this way, but it basically ends right there. Like, she shoots him, he dies in her arms by the waterfall. They all come rushing up. You know, Hugo Weaving's holding his neck, and he sees the scene, and it's kind of like a bit of this relief, but then it's like, is it really over? And then the movie ends.
Yeah, I like how abruptly it ends.
I don't know if someone says it where it's like, kill a beast, not a man, where one ends and the other begins. Like, there's some kind of cryptic poetry at the end of this.
Gwen does some voiceover about that. She's recalling something she hears earlier in the movie.
Yeah, but it's as like we're fading out, you know, which is like even crazier.
Yeah, just sort of hammering home the point that there's like a beast inside of everyone, and like, where do we draw that line?
But there we go.
That's the Wolfman. There were a couple of endings that they shot and a couple other endings that they wrote. I think that this is the best way to do it. You know, as we know from experience, just because we see Lawrence Talbot die does not mean he is forever dead. I mean, this came out in 2010. I think we can safely assume they're not going to be following up to this. I'm totally fine with him dying on screen at the end of the movie because, like, these characters never stay dead forever.
Not until you rob his grave and like dig the silver out to sell it, and then he like that. Or like he decomposes so much the bullet falls through his corpse and then he like, you know, reforms. I don't know, but it would have been great to have a part 2 or to like keep the series going from here with a Frankenstein or with a Dracula or something like that. So like at the end of all this, it's kind of a shame or a pity that this is all we really get out of this side of the MonsterVerse.
I don't think this was ever intended to launch any kind of like sequels or a shared universe. I think they learned their lesson, at least for the time being, but it would have been cool to see a continuation. I agree.
Yeah, I wasn't really thinking shared universe. I think that's what they decided after this didn't work. This was 2010, so I guess a couple years later was the Mummy reboot, Dark Universe, and all that. So that's where they ended up trying to go in that direction. But it's like too bad they weren't just like, hey, let's just focus on redoing them as original period pieces, R-rated period pieces like this, and see what happens. And like, I would have been there for that. It would have been cool now to have that.
Actually, not to like look too far ahead, but so this came out in 2010. In 2014, that's when we got Dracula Untold, which was supposed to be the start of the Dark Universe.
Which is drastically different in all kinds of tone.
Yeah, before they had a name for the Dark Universe, that was supposed to kind of be the beginning of something bigger. And that's why that's what Charles Dance's character was for in there, I believe. We'll talk about that when we get there. But when that didn't work either, then it was like, okay, we're going to do the Dark Universe and let's do the Mummy. And so it didn't take that long for them to try again, oddly enough.
What is kind of nice about this is you could say, even though they're not all like Universal movies, like this Wolfman, Bram Stoker's Dracula, when we get there eventually Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein, and maybe even Frank Langella Dracula. Like, I feel like those 4 movies kind of feel like a collection in a way.
Yeah, well, they were all made around the same time, and so they have like this sort of visual similarity.
Yeah, and they're not really going for like the action type like The Mummy did. Like I wouldn't necessarily include The Mummy with those movies because it's doing something totally different, which is also very awesome. But these just seem to be more somber, a little more serious, and a little more R-rated.
Yeah, but I really like this Wolfman. I'm glad we got the chance to talk so much about it.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts? Anything else you want to say before we wrap this one up?
Usually I put the movie back on the shelf for a bit, but like this is going to stick around. I might have to pop this in again soon, or at least I'm going to be watching sequences. I'm so glad we got here. Like, I'm definitely hype on this movie now. Like, I'm going to recommend it a lot. Like, if it ever comes up and people, want to know they should see it, definitely see it. In a rare turn of events that the director's cut is actually the ultimate cut, right? Like, I feel like that's
Sure.
the one you should. Like, I'm not generally that kind of guy for whatever reason. I just kind of take the theatrical cut at face value and say that's the movie you got, right? And like from time to time, I like seeing extended versions, but I never really consider them the official cut. But like this, to me, is the one you got to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you want like the total experience, if you want the immersion, if you want the full story, check this one. I feel like it gives you the full impact. At the end, when you get the battle and the fight and the fire and the drama and the opera and everything, it all feels like it paid off.
This is one of those rare unrated director's cuts where some of the stuff that was cut out does feel integral to it. Most of the time, these unrated cuts, it's just like, well, we're just going to re-edit in some of these scenes that we took out for time. And so they're usually just throwaway scenes, and they don't really benefit the movie at all. Oh, you want more of this scene? Here you go. This actually, they took out some scenes that I think are really important. But yeah, I'm going to echo what you said. I think more people should watch this. Check out the director's cut. It is the better version. I think I might have been a little harsher on it in this recording than I meant to be, but I would like to say that I gave it 4.5 stars out of 5 on Letterboxd. So when this movie works for me, it's like some of the best stuff. I really, really love how they've updated the Wolfman. They've taken the basic bones of what we know from 1941 and improved on it in so many ways. I'm not sure if I'm ready to say that I think it's a better movie than the 1941 Wolfman, because that is such a classic. But the things that they improved made sense to improve. They updated the makeup. There's more violence, as there should be violence in a werewolf movie. I don't think there's ever going to be a good excuse for how creepy Larry Talbot is in the original movie, and they took that out of the story. So it does improve the general narrative in a lot of ways. It's not perfect. It's definitely got some problems. I mean, any movie that goes through extensive reshoots like this one did is bound to have some issues. But overall, I think that it's batting way above its weight class here. So its reputation suggests a piece of shit, and it is by no means a piece of shit.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, is it a perfect film? Not for everybody. Like, does it have some problems? Yeah, the 25 years gap thing was a little hard to swallow for me from time to time. But like, ultimately, like, this is exactly what I wanted from the Wolfman.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it's because, like I said at the beginning of the show, we were watching like Scorpion King stuff and like wacky Van Helsing things. Like, that stuff's fun and it's good and everything. But like, this is way more of like what I'm here for.
It's funny that you mentioned that. I'm curious to know if watching Scorpion King sequels in between some of these movies is going to make the average go up for some of them. You know what I mean?
Yes and no, because I'm watching other movies between these movies too. These aren't just the only movies in my life I'm watching. Like, I'm watching, I just went through a tear, like, check out my Letterboxd. I just watched some great stuff over the last month, so this is contending with a lot of recent good stuff. Maybe I would say definitely to some degree because of the show, when we're comparing what we're watching from month to month on the show. But I don't know that it's like, for me, that it's an overwhelming effect because of like all the other stuff that I've been watching.
That's a good point. But you are right, though. When we're here recording, we are often thinking about the last thing we just watched and talked about, and maybe the one before that. And so we start to lump them together in our minds. I loved this movie before we talked about it for this show, and I was glad to revisit it with a new eye and talk to you about it, get your perspective. You might have made me like it more in some respects. So
enthusiastic tonight.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode. But don't worry, we'll be back on Friday, June 28th to discuss The Scorpion King 3, Battle for Redemption. It's got a pretty fun cast.
Well, I still don't know. It's going to be a big surprise.
Yes, it's going to be a good one to talk about in that way, at least. Looking forward to that. But in the meantime, you can follow us on X, aka Twitter, at Monster Made Pod. We're also on Blue Sky at Monster Made Pod, and we're on Instagram and Facebook at The Monsters That Made Us. You can follow me pretty much everywhere at Dan Cologne. Mike, where can listeners find you?
You can also follow me pretty much everywhere at _Mikester, MIKESTIR, and all the other shows I'm on are at cageclub.me.
If you enjoyed this episode and you want to support the show, you can become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/The Monsters That Made Us. You can also support the show by giving us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes, and we can't forget about our t-shirts on TeePublic. You can find the link for that in our aforementioned Twitter and Instagram bios. For all other things Cage Club related, just head on over to cageclub.me. That's cageclub.me. Stay spooky, everybody.